Hey everyone, tonight we'll delve into the whispers that echoed from the center of the ancient world, from a crack in the earth that dictated the fate of empires. You were standing on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, looking down at the ruins of Delphi, where for 1,000 years, a voice that was not quite human spoke prophecies through the lips of a mortal priestess. The vapors that rose from that chasm twisted reality, and the truths they revealed were often more dangerous than any lie. You probably won't want to believe what you are about to hear, because the story of the Oracle of Apollo isn't about a benevolent god offering guidance. It's about a forbidden magic, a psychological gateway, a power so ancient that even the god of light himself could only borrow it, never truly control it. So, before the tension gets too high, take a moment to like the episode and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. When you're done, post your city and the time where you are in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now close your eyes, imagine the ancient mountains, and let's unravel this epic tale together. The air is thin up here, sharp and clean with the scent of pine and wild thyme. But beneath it there is another smell. Something heavier, sweeter, and vaguely metallic that seems to rise from the very stones beneath your feet. You are walking the sacred way, the winding path that pilgrims, peasants, and kings once followed to the heart of all mysteries. The paving stones are worn smooth by a million desperate footsteps, each one carrying a question that could make or break a life. To your left and right, the skeletal remains of treasuries rise up like broken teeth small. Temple-like buildings where city-states like Athens and Corinth once stored their offerings to the god. Gold, bronze, and ivory, all given in the desperate hope of buying a favorable future. You can almost hear the ghosts of their prayers whispering on the wind that whips down from the twin peaks of the Phaedriades. The shining rocks that tower over you, their limestone faces glowing, with an eerie pearlescent light in the late afternoon sun. This place feels alive, not just with history, but with something more immediate, a kind of low-frequency hum that seems to vibrate in your bones. The ancient Greeks knew this feeling well. They believed this was the center of the world, the amphilis or navel of all creation. The legend, as you recall it, is simple and grand. Zeus, seeking to find the planet's exact center, released two golden eagles from opposite ends of the earth. They soared across continents and oceans, and their paths finally converged here, at this very spot, where they spiraled down from the heavens and landed together. A sacred stone, the Omphalos stone, was placed to mark the spot, a strange, egg-shaped monolith covered in carved netting, presenting the interconnectedness of all things. With this chasm, this voice, at its core, you can see a replica of it now, a silent testament to a belief that held the world in its thrall. But as you look at it, a sliver of doubt enters your mind. The story is too neat, too poetic. Feels like a story designed to legitimize a place that was already powerful. A myth draped over a truth that was far more raw and unsettling. You continue your ascent, past the magnificent, reconstructed columns of the Athenian treasury. Each step feels heavier than the last, as if the very gravity of the mountain is increasing, pulling you toward the great temple precinct above. You are entering the domain of Apollo, the god of light, music, poetry, and prophecy. He is a deity of clarity and reason, his symbol the sun itself. Yet there is a darkness here, a primal weight that feels far older than the shining Olympian. You remember a strange detail about him, a quirky fact you once read: his iconic lyre, the instrument of sublime celestial music, was crafted for him by the infant trickster god Hermes. Its soundboard was a hollowed-out tortoise shell, and its strings were made from the dried entrails of cattle, an object of divine harmony born from animal death. It's a bizarre and unsettling origin. A hint that even in the most beautiful creations of the gods, there is a foundation of something far more visceral and brutal. And as you feel the hum of this mountain intensify, you suspect the same is true of Apollo's greatest prize, the oracle itself. Finally, you reach the terrace. Before you lie the foundations of the great temple of Apollo, a sprawling platform of immense stone blocks. 6 lonely Doric columns are all that remain, reaching for the sky like accusing fingers. This is where it all happened. Inside these no-vanished walls, the Pythia, the high priestess, would sit upon a bronze tripod, positioned directly over the fabled chasm. She would breathe in the sacred vapors, the pneuma, and her mind would unravel, becoming a vessel for the god's voice. You walk to the edge of the foundation, peering down into the excavated inner sanctum. The Adyton, a chamber forbidden to all but the most senior priests. You see the cracks in the bedrock, the fissures from which the vapors were said to rise. There is no smoke now, no mystical gas, and yet the air shimmers. The scent of sweet decay and ionized rock is stronger here. You feel a strange pressure behind your eyes, a lightheadedness that is more than just the altitude. It feels like standing on the edge of a vast, invisible ocean of consciousness, the psychic residue of 1,000 years of prophecy. Kings were told of their doom here. Heroes were sent on impossible quests. The course of Western civilization was shaped by the babbling, ecstatic cries of a woman lost in a divine trance. But the question that remained, the one that the priests of Apollo never dared to answer, was what, precisely, was she channeling? Was it truly the clear, rational mind of a sun god? Or was it something else? Something that had been lurking in the deep earth long before the Olympians ever cast their shadows on this world? The shimmering air in front of you seems to coalesce, the hum in your bones deepening into a low, guttural thrum. The story of Apollo's arrival here is not one of gentle settlement, but of violent conquest. You must cast your mind back, before the shining columns and the treasuries of gold, to a time when this mountain belonged to a different, older power. Before Apollo, Delphi was called Pythia. It was a place of chthonic worship. It's a sanctuary dedicated to the primordial Earth Mother Gaia, and its guardian was not a god but a monster. Her name was Python, a colossal serpent, a dracana born from the mud and slime of the great flood that had once wiped the world clean. She was the daughter of Gaia herself, and her coils wrapped around the mountain, her very presence sanctifying the chasm from which the vapors of prophecy arose. This was her place. The voice that spoke from the earth was her mother's voice. Python didn't just guard the oracle. In a way, she was the oracle. Her serpentine form was a living conduit for the planet's deep, chaotic, and terrifyingly honest consciousness. Imagine the scene. You are there, hidden among the ancient forests of Parnassus. The world is younger, wilder. The air is thick with the raw magic of creation. Down below in the rocky cleft, the great serpent rests. She is not a creature of simple scales and venom. Her hide shimmers with the colors of oil on water. Her eyes are ancient jewels holding the wisdom of millennia, and when she moves, the ground itself trembles. The vapors that curl around her are not just geological gases. They are the breath of the world's soul, and Python translates their meaning not into words, but into pure, unfiltered visions of what was, what is, and what could be. The local tribes, the first inhabitants of this land, would come to her not with questions of war or politics, but with pleas for fertility, for the turning of the seasons, for a connection to the deep rhythmic pulse of life and death. Python's power was elemental, cyclical, and deeply feminine. It was the magic of the earth, the moon, and the blood. Then he arrives. Apollo, a golden youth, blazing with a light that this dark, ancient place had never known. He is the son of Zeus, a creature of the sky, of order, of the new pantheon of Olympian gods who are systematically overthrowing the old titans and primordial deities. He strides into the valley, his silver bow in hand, his golden hair a stark contrast to the deep greens and browns of Gaia's domain. He sees the chasm, feels its immense power, and knows he must possess it. This is a political move as much as a spiritual one. To control the most potent oracle in the world is to control the flow of information, to bend the arc of destiny itself. But Python stands in his way. She rises from her lair, a mountain of living flesh and ancient fury. The battle that ensues is not merely a fight between a god and a beast. It is a clash of cosmic principles. It is the sky against the earth, the new order of masculine logic against the ancient chaos of feminine intuition. You hear the twang of Apollo's silver bow, a sound like a plucked star. Golden arrows, shafts of pure sunlight rain down upon the great serpent. They hiss as they strike her shimmering hide. But she is a child of Gaia. She is made of the mountain itself. She retaliates, her massive body uncoiling with terrifying speed. She spews a torrent of black venomous bile that sizzles and eats away at the very rock where it lands. The clash is epic, shaking Parnassus to its foundations. Apollo, for all his divine power, is challenged. He is a god of light and clarity, and this creature is his opposite, a being of darkness, depth, and primal mystery. The fight rages for days, a whirlwind of golden light and writhing, shadowy coils. Finally, with a desperate final shot, Apollo sends an arrow straight into the serpent's gaping maw. It finds its mark. Python convulses, her death throes carving new ravines into the mountainside. She crashes to the ground, and as her lifeblood drains away, it seeps back into the earth, into the very chasm she once protected. Apollo is victorious, stands, breathing heavily, over the corpse of his monstrous foe. He has conquered Pythia. He renames it Delphi, in honor of the dolphin that guided the Cretan sailors who would become his first priests. A local historical fact you recall is that these sailors were supposedly tricked by Apollo, who appeared as a dolphin and hijacked their ship, forcing them to serve him here. Even the founding of his priesthood was an act of divine coercion. Apollo, the god of truth, built his holy site upon a bedrock of violence and deceit. He takes the monster's name for his priestess, the Pythia, and claims the oracle's power as his own. But you realize, watching the serpent's blood soak into the ground, that he hasn't destroyed the power. He hasn't replaced it. He has only put a new name on it. The magic of Delphi, the forbidden, chaotic, earthen magic, was never his to begin with. He is merely a gatekeeper, a warden standing guard over a power he defeated but could never truly understand. He slew the body, but the serpent's spirit, its ancient consciousness, has now merged with the vapors themselves. But the quirky, unsettling detail about this new arrangement was this. From that moment on, the sacred laurel trees of Delphi, whose leaves the Pythia would chew to begin her trance, were said to be nourished by the lingering venom and blood of the slain python. The priestesses were literally ingesting the essence of the very being their god had killed. But the question that arises from the carnage is a chilling one. When Apollo stole the oracle, what ancient serpentine power did he truly steal? And what parts of it remained, coiled and waiting in the darkness below? The blood of the slain python has soaked deep into the bedrock of Parnassus, and the spirit of the serpent is now one with the prophetic vapors. Apollo, the glorious conqueror, stands master of a temple built on stolen ground, holding a leash attached to a power that is now wounded, enraged, and infinitely more cunning. His new world order, one of rational, structured prophecy, requires a crucial component he does not possess: a mortal nervous system, human mind, fragile and pliable, to act as a bridge between the terrifying raw data of the chasm and the structured language of men. He needs a translator, a filter, a sacrifice. He needs his Pythia. Your mind's eye turns from the god to a windswept pasture higher up the mountain. You see a young woman, no older than 20. She is not a princess or an aristocrat. She is a shepherdess, her hands calloused from her crook and the coarse wool of her flock, her face weathered by the same sun and wind that beat against the shining rocks. The traditions of the priests who came later would give her a name, Femino, which means prophetic mind, a name she was given only after her own was burned away. For now, she is just a girl, and her world is one of goats, wildflowers, and the familiar cycle of seasons. But for weeks, something has been wrong. She hears a whisper beneath the sound of the wind, a low thrumming that seems to rise from the soles of her feet. Her dreams are filled with coiling, shadowy shapes, and the feeling of being deep underground. She finds herself staring for hours at the valley below, at the raw, new scar on the landscape where the golden god has built his temple. She feels a pull, a dreadful and irresistible magnetism, drawing her down from the safety of her pastures. One morning, she leaves her flock untended. She doesn't know why. Her feet simply begin to move, carrying her down the goat paths toward the gleaming, unfinished structure. The first priests, the Cretan sailors Apollo hijacked, are there. They are men of the sea, accustomed to charts and stars, and they are unnerved by this raw terrestrial power. They see the shepherdess approach, her eyes wide and unfocused, as if in a trance. They see her as the answer to their prayers, the first vessel for their god's voice. They lead her inside. The temple is not yet the marble wonder it will become. It is a stark, wooden structure, smelling of fresh-cut timber and the metallic temps of the chasm. The historians would later record that Delphi's temple had to be rebuilt 4 times. The very first one, they said, was a humble hut woven from laurel branches. A later, more mythical version, and a truly bizarre detail of the lore, claimed one temple was constructed by bees out of beeswax and feathers, a delicate, impossible structure that hinted at a different kind of magic altogether. But this first man-made temple is crude, and the Adyton, the inner sanctum, is little more than a pit. The priests guide her to the edge of the fissure. They have followed their god's instructions, placing a great bronze tripod over the most active part of the crack in the earth. Its 3 legs represent the past, present, and future, but its design is cold and alien. They bid her to sit. She obeys, her movements stiff and robotic. She is terrified, but her own will is no longer in control. As she settles onto the cold metal seat, the priests begin a chant, a hesitant, formulaic appeal to Apollo. But it is not Apollo who answers. From the fissure below, the pneuma rises. It is not a gentle mist. It is a thick, visible vapor, coiling like a living thing, smelling of sweet rot and ozone. It envelops her, and you watch as she inhales. Her first gasp is sharp, a strangled cry. And then the transformation begins. You are inside her mind, and it is a place of pure terror. The whispers she heard on the mountain are now a roar. The coiling shapes from her dreams are here, and they are real. She feels something entering her consciousness, not with the clean, bright light of a sun god, but with the invasive, slithering purpose of a serpent. It is the vengeful, potent consciousness of Python, fused with the chaotic energy of Gaia. It crawls into the pathways of her brain, a cold, ancient thing exploring her memories, her fears, her identity. It tastes her love for her family, her simple joy in a summer's day, and it finds them quaint, insignificant. It is looking for the cracks, the dark places, the synaptic gaps it can force its way through. She begins to shake violently, her knuckles white where she grips the tripod. Her head whips back, her mouth opens, but the scream that emerges is not human. It is a chorus of voices, a layered, discordant shriek that echoes with the grinding of tectonic plates and the hissing of steam. The priests fall back in horror. This is not the clear, melodious voice of Apollo. This is divine madness in its most raw and terrifying form. The serpent inside her mind uncoils, and through her lips it speaks its first prophecy. It is not a rhyming hexameter of guidance. It is a torrent of fragmented images, of burning cities and weeping kings, of celestial alignments, and the taste of blood on a usurper's tongue. It is the unfiltered data stream of fate, and it is utterly incoherent to the terrified men before her. Hours later, the vapors recede. The shaking stops. The priests creep forward and lift the limp form of the woman from the tripod. She is alive, but the person she was is gone. Her eyes, once the simple brown of the earth, are now pale and luminous, like the opals found deep within the mountain. They do not seem to see the men in front of her. They are looking past them, through them, into a place of terrifying vistas. They lead her out of the temple, this hollowed-out shell of a shepherdess. She is the first Pythia, a living oracle. Apollo has his vessel. But as you watch her being guided away, a puppet whose strings are now held by the very entity that God sought to destroy, the true horror of this place begins to settle in your soul. The question that hangs in the air, more potent than any vapor, is this. Was this transformation an honor, a sacred anointing by a god of light? Or was it the most profound violation imaginably form of psychic parasitism, the installation of an ancient, monstrous consciousness into a human mind, all sanctioned and repackaged as a divine gift? The newly consecrated Pythia is led away, her mind a shattered vessel now filled with the serpent's echo. Your focus shifts from the psychological horror of her transformation to the physical source of the power itself. You descend, not metaphorically this time, but physically. You are passing through the stone floor of the Adyton, sinking into the bedrock of Mount Parnassus. The air grows thick and warm, and the hum you felt on the surface is now a deafening, subsonic roar. You are entering the geological engine room of the Oracle, the forbidden space beneath the temple floor where science and myth collide with terrifying force. The world of the gods, with their shining chariots and petty squabbles, fades away, replaced by the immense, impersonal violence of planetary processes. You are standing in a network of underground chambers and fissures, a labyrinth carved by millennia of water and tectonic stress. Two major fault lines, the Kurna and Delphi faults, intersect directly beneath the spot where the tripod stood. This is a point of immense geological instability. You can feel the tension in the rock around you, the stored energy of a continent slowly grinding itself apart. The rock itself is a bituminous limestone, rich in hydrocarbon deposits, the fossilized remains of countless prehistoric creatures. As the tectonic plates shift and grind against each other, the friction generates incredible heat. This heat bakes the limestone, causing it to release volatile, intoxicating gases. It's a natural petrochemical factory, running deep in the planet's secret places. This geological fact was only confirmed in the late 20th century, validating the accounts of ancient writers like Plutarch, who was himself a priest at Delphi and wrote extensively about the sweet-smelling pneuma. But what the ancient writers described and what you are now witnessing is more than a simple gas leak. The vapors are not just seeping, they are pulsing. Following the rhythm of the seismic activity, they are released in great concentrated bursts. You see them now, rising from a deep, water-filled cavern below you. The groundwater, heated by the same geothermal processes, becomes saturated with these gases. It fizzes and bubbles like a carbonated drink from the underworld. The main components are methane, ethane, and most importantly, ethylene. Ethylene, you recall, is a simple hydrocarbon, but its effects on the human brain are anything but. In small doses, it produces a state of euphoria, a feeling of disembodied bliss. In slightly higher concentrations, it induces a trance-like state, complete with visual and auditory hallucinations. It opens the doors of perception, just as the ancient priests claimed. The science seems to explain it all, a neat, rational box to contain the mystery. And yet as you watch the iridescent bubbles rise through the water and burst, releasing their shimmering contents into the air, you realize the scientific explanation is profoundly incomplete. It explains the how, but not the what. It explains the trigger, but not the nature of the visions themselves. Why did the visions cohere into prophecies? Why did they speak of the future with such chilling accuracy? The gas is a key, but what door does it unlock? You follow the path of the rising vapors, up through a narrow fissure in the rock. A geological chimney that channels them directly toward the floor of the temple's inner sanctum. The serpent python, in the old myths, was said to have dwelt in a cave or spring. Perhaps she was the mythological explanation for this very real, very dangerous geological phenomenon. The air around you is now thick with the pneuma. Feel its effects beginning to work on your own consciousness. The edges of your vision soften, and the low roar of the earth begins to sound like a voice, a vast, sleeping intelligence murmuring in a language you almost understand. The experience is seductive, even beautiful. You feel a sense of connection to the deep, slow time of the planet itself. And in that moment you grasp the true nature of the forbidden magic. The gases are not just a simple intoxicant. They are a neurolinguistic key. They don't just make you see things. They alter the brain's ability to process reality, specifically its perception of time. You remember a bizarre detail about a related cult, the Mysteries of Eleusis, which also involved ingesting a psychoactive substance? Initiates there spoke of experiencing aphapsis, a direct touching or merging with the divine. A moment where their personal consciousness dissolved into something far greater. That is what is happening here. The ethylene is breaking down the brain's linear conception of past, present, and future. For the Pythia, sitting directly in the concentrated plume of this psychoactive storm, her consciousness would not just bend. It would shatter. Her mind already primed by fasting, ritual, and the ingestion of the toxic laurel leaves would become an open receiver. The gases opened a door, a neural gateway, but what lay on the other side was not the clean, orderly mind of Apollo. It was the chaotic, timeless consciousness of the earth itself, encoded in the very rock and water. It was the memory of the planet, the echo of Python's spirit, the collected psychic residue of every living thing that had ever been. It was a torrent of information so vast and overwhelming that it could only be expressed in madness, in riddles, in the fragmented screams of a possessed shepherdess. The vapors opened doors the gods never intended mortals to glimpse, because these doors led to a place outside of the gods' control, a place of primordial truth that predated their entire existence. The question that resonates in this subterranean chamber is terrifying. If this gas could do that to a human mind, what would happen if the fissure widened, if a truly massive, uncontrolled release were to blanket the entire valley, or a city, or a continent? You ascend from the intoxicating depths, your mind still reeling from the revelation of the geological engine beneath Delphi. You rise back through the floor of the Ataton, the air clearing, the low roar fading back into a subtle hum. Your focus is now drawn to the one object that served as the direct interface between the Pythia and the chasm: the sacred tripod. It is an object of immense power and mystery, far more than a simple piece of furniture. You see it before you, not the crude original, but the one that stood for centuries at the heart of the temple. It is cast from flawless bronze, its surface polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the flickering torchlight in distorted, wavering patterns. Its 3 legs are long and elegant, like those of a great wading bird, anchoring it firmly over the fissure in the earth. The seat is a shallow, concave bowl, basin designed to collect not just the body of the priestess, but the rising vapors themselves. As you draw closer, you see that the entire surface of the tripod is covered in exquisite, almost microscopic engravings. This is not the grand, heroic art you see on the temple pediments. This is something else, something older and more secretive. The engravings do not depict gods or heroes. Instead, they show complex geometric patterns, spiraling nebulae, and what look like star charts, but of constellations no human eye has ever seen from Earth. There are also biological diagrams of unnerving detail: the branching of neurons, the double helix of DNA, the cellular structure of plants that seem both familiar and alien. It is a visual encyclopedia of cosmic and terrestrial knowledge, a blueprint of reality itself, etched into the metal. The priests of Apollo told the world that the tripod was a symbolic offering, representing divine harmony. But as you trace the intricate lines with your finger, you realize it is a piece of technology. It is a user manual. The official story, the one told to the endless streams of pilgrims, was that the tripod was a gift from the gods. But a more obscure local legend, one whispered only in the deepest corners of the sanctuary, claimed it was not a gift, but a discovery. The story goes that after Apollo slew Python, his first priests explored the caves beneath the chasm. In a hidden chamber, untouched for eons, they found the tripod, standing alone in the darkness, humming with a faint internal energy. It was not of Olympian design. Its craftsmanship was utterly alien, suggesting it had been placed there by a far older, perhaps non-human, intelligence. This connects to a bizarre and recurring theme in Greek mythology: the existence of the dactyls, a group of mythical beings credited with the discovery of iron and the art of metalworking. They were said to have sprung from the earth when the mother goddess Rhea gave birth to Zeus, their fingers literally digging into the ground in her pain. These chthonic smiths, these fingermen, were associated with strange knowledge and magical artifacts. The tripod feels like their work, feels like it belongs to the earth, not the sky. Your eyes are drawn to a specific set of engravings around the rim of the basin, where the Pythia would have been seated. These are different from the cosmic diagrams. They are a series of small, precise pictograms. They show a figure, presumably the priestess, performing a series of physical and mental actions. There are images depicting specific breathing patterns, sequences of inhaling and holding the breath that seem designed to maximize the absorption of the pneuma. There are diagrams of hand positions, mudras, that channel the body's energy in specific ways. And most chillingly, there are symbols representing mental states: focus, dissolution, and a final symbol that seems to signify a willing surrender of the self. These are not prayers to Apollo. These are instructions. They form a ritual protocol for safely, or perhaps not so safely, navigating the overwhelming flood of information that came from the chasm. It was a technique for opening the mind, channel by channel, to the serpent's consciousness without suffering complete psychic annihilation. This is the tripod's terrible secret. It was not merely a seat. It was a focusing device, a kind of neural amplifier and regulator. The bronze alloy it was made from, you suspect, was not ordinary. It was likely chosen for its specific resonant properties, its ability to interact with the electromagnetic fields generated by the geological activity and the human nervous system. It stabilized the connection, tuning the Pythia's mind to the frequency of the Earth's whispers, much like a radio receiver is tuned to a specific station. The Apollonian priests, for all their structured religion, were unknowingly presiding over a shamanic technology of incredible sophistication and danger. They would interpret the Pythia's cries into neat, ambiguous hexameters, imposing their god's order on the raw chaos that poured through her. But the engravings on the tripod whisper a different story. They whisper instructions for bypassing the filter, for going beyond the Apollonian framework. They describe how a Pythia, if she were brave or foolish enough, could follow these hidden steps to open a direct, unfiltered conduit to the source. She could go beyond being a mere vessel for Apollo's version of the truth and merge directly with the primordial consciousness of Python. This would be the ultimate forbidden magic, a complete rejection of the Olympian order. It would grant access to a truth so vast and terrifying, it could shatter not just a mind, but the very concept of reality the gods had worked so hard to construct. But the question that screams from the cold bronze is this: did any priestess ever dare to follow these secret instructions? And if she did, what did she become? You pull your gaze away from the hypnotic engravings on the tripod, the manual for forbidden magic, now seared into your mind. The implications are staggering, but for a moment, you turn your attention from the how of the oracle to the what. What were the results of this terrifying process? The history books are filled with the Pythia's pronouncements, the ambiguous verses that sent armies marching and kings to their doom. The power of the oracle was not theoretical. It was a geopolitical force that shaped the ancient world. You were now standing in the shoes of a supplicant, a king, or a general from the 7th century BCE. Waiting in the antechamber of the temple, the faint, sweet smell of the pneuma leaking from under the doors, a tantalizing poison. The air is thick with anxiety and the smell of sacrificial goat's blood. Your heart hammers against your ribs because you know the words you are about to receive will become your reality. You think of the most famous prophecies, the ones that have echoed through millennia. The one given to the Athenians as the massive Persian army of Xerxes bore down on them. The city was in a panic, ready to surrender. They sent envoys to Delphi, and the first answer was one of utter despair. The Pythia shrieked of fire and ruin, telling them to flee to the ends of the earth, for nothing could be saved. "All is lost," she cried, "for the fire and the headlong god of war, driving a Syrian chariot, will destroy you." The envoys, devastated, were about to leave. But a priest, perhaps sensing the political disaster of such a prophecy, advised them to reapproach the oracle as humble supplicants. They did, and this time the answer was different. Still terrifying, but with a sliver of hope. The Pythia spoke of a wooden wall that would alone remain uncaptured, a wall that would bring salvation to you and your children. The Athenians debated this frantically. Some thought it meant to fortify the Acropolis with a wooden palisade. But Themistocles, the brilliant and cunning statesman, argued for a different interpretation. The wooden wall, he insisted, was the fleet of wooden ships. He convinced the Athenians to abandon their city to the flames and put their entire faith in their navy. The result was the Battle of Salamis, a decisive naval victory where the smaller, more agile Greek fleet decimated the mighty Persian armada in the narrow straits. The prophecy was fulfilled. Athens was saved. It is a story of divine guidance and human ingenuity, a perfect example of the oracle's power. But now, with what you know, you see it through a different lens. Was this truly Apollo guiding the Athenians? Or was it the serpent's consciousness, flowing through the Pythia, simply stating a fact? The ethylene vapors, you remember, fracture the perception of linear time. For the consciousness in the chasm, the Battle of Salamis had, in a sense, already happened. The Pythia wasn't predicting. She was reporting. She was seeing the branching paths of probability and simply describing the one that led to survival. And what about the priest's role? The fact that they sent the envoys back for a second, more useful answer, suggests a degree of manipulation, a retuning of the question to get a less catastrophic, more actionable response. They were managing the output, curating the chaos. This curation is a vital piece of the puzzle. The Pythia's words were rarely, if ever, clear. They were ecstatic, fragmented, and often contradictory. It was the duty of the male priests, the prophets, to interpret her cries and translate them into the elegant, ambiguous hexameter verses that were then given to the supplicant. This process is where the true power lay. The priests could shape the raw, terrifying data from the chasm into a message that served their own purposes, or the political agenda of the Amphictyonic League that controlled Delphi. You recall a quirky and telling detail about the god's own relationship with truth, Zeus. The king of the gods was married to Metis, the titaness of wisdom and cunning. An oracle, ironically, one from Gaia, predicted that Metis would bear a son who would overthrow him. To prevent this, Zeus tricked Metis into turning herself into a fly, and then he swallowed her, absorbed her wisdom, but in doing so, he committed a profound act of deceit to maintain his power. This is the divine model the Delphic priests followed. Absorb the raw truth, then package it in a way that preserves the existing power structure. So when a king received his prophecy, was he hearing the voice of a god, the scream of the serpent, or the carefully crafted political advice of a council of priests? The answer, you realize, is all three. It was a layered system of information laundering. Raw, nonlinear data from the planetary consciousness, filtered through the shattered mind of a human woman, and then edited, polished, and weaponized by a political religious elite. The prophecies shattered empires, yes. They told kings that their magnificent reigns would end in fire and dust. But the genius of the system was its ambiguity. The pronouncements were always just vague enough that after the fact, they would seem miraculously accurate. The victim of the prophecy often became the agent of its fulfillment, walking into a trap of their own making because they believed the oracle S-words were an inescapable fate. They heard a great empire will fall, and, assuming it meant their enemies, they launched a war that ultimately destroyed their own. But the question that this leaves you with is a deeply unsettling one. Turning the entire history of Delphi on its head, did the oracle predict the future, or did its prophecies, by implanting suggestions into the minds of the powerful, actively create it? The chilling realization that the oracle might not just predict the future, but actively create it, settles over you like a shroud. The power of the spoken word, amplified by divine authority and channeled through a shattered human mind, becomes a force of terrifying creation. But if the answers held such world-bending power, what about the questions? You imagine the scene on any given consultation day? The sacred way is choked with supplicants from across the known world. A king from Lydia, a general from Sparta, a wealthy merchant from Egypt, all waiting, their futures held in suspense. But they are not in a neat queue waiting for their turn. The process is far more controlled, more filtered than that. The priests of Apollo are the gatekeepers, and their first and most important duty is not to interpret the prophecy, but to vet the question. You learn of the official rules, the ones written down and understood by all. The oracle was only open for business one day a month, on the 7th day of the month, for the 9 months of the year that Apollo was said to reside at Delphi. During the winter, he was believed to travel to the land of the Hyperboreans, and the oracle fell silent. This historical fact, presented as a matter of the god's vacation schedule, as you now suspect, a necessary cool-down period for the geological engine beneath the temple, and for the psychic integrity of the Pythia herself. On the appointed days, supplicants had to perform sacrifices, and the priests would examine the entrails for good omens. If the signs were unfavorable, the god was not speaking today, even if the omens were good. The questions were not whispered directly to the priestess. They were submitted to the priests, who would then decide the order and, more importantly, the acceptability of the query. Trivial questions, matters of petty personal gain or romantic entanglement, were often dismissed. The god, they would say, does not concern himself with such things. But beneath these official regulations lay a deeper, unwritten set of laws. There were the forbidden questions. These were not merely trivial, they were dangerous. They were questions that poked and prodded at the very foundations of the reality the Olympians had constructed. You can almost see the list, written on no scroll, but burned into the mind of every senior priest. To ask about the personal lives of the gods, their fears, their limitations. To ask, where did you come from before you came here? Or what were you before you were a god? To ask about the end of the gods, the twilight that the Norse so openly discussed, but that the Greeks veiled in layers of metaphorical succession myths. To ask the oracle to prove its own power by revealing a secret that only the questioner knew. A direct challenge to its omniscience. Why were these questions forbidden? Because they were not requests for guidance. They were diagnostic probes. They were attempts to hack the system. You realize the entire Apollonian framework was a sophisticated containment protocol. The priests were like technicians managing a terrifyingly powerful, fundamentally unstable energy source, the serpent's consciousness. Their job was to keep it running within safe parameters. A standard question about war or harvest was a simple input that would generate a manageable, if ambiguous, output. But a forbidden question was like a malicious string of code. It could cause the system to crash, or worse, it could trigger a response that bypassed the Apollonian filter entirely. An answer to a forbidden question would not be a cryptic poem. It would be a raw data dump from the chasm. It would be a stream of pure, unmediated truth from the planet's consciousness. Truth that could irrevocably shatter the mind of the questioner and unravel the fragile consensus reality of gods and mortals. In a hidden dusty chamber behind the main treasury, you imagine a small illicit shrine. It is not dedicated to Apollo. It is a small altar to a minor foreign-born god named Harpocrates, the Greek adaptation of the Egyptian child god Horus, the quirky. Bizarre detail of this deity is his iconography. He is always depicted as a young boy with his finger held to his lips, demanding silence. He was the god of secrets, confidentiality, and silence. The priests of Apollo, the purveyors of divine revelation, were secretly paying homage to the god of keeping your mouth shut. Here they would reaffirm their vows, not just to protect the oracle's commercial secrets, but to protect the world from the truths the oracle was capable of telling. They were the wardens of a terrible knowledge, and their greatest fear was a leak. So what would happen if a supplicant, through cunning or sheer force of will, managed to get a forbidden question past the priestly firewalls? You picture a brash, skeptical philosopher striding into the adjutant. The Pythia is on the tripod, already lost in her trance. The priest poses the approved, sanitized question. But the philosopher shouts over him, his voice echoing in the sacred space. Who is it that truly speaks through this woman? Give me your name. Not the name of the god who claims you, but your name. The air in the chamber would freeze. A dead silence would fall. The Pythia's ecstatic cries cut short. The priest would look at the philosopher, not with anger, but with a primal, bottomless terror. For he has not just broken a rule, he has addressed the prisoner directly, ignoring the warden. He has asked the serpent to speak for itself. And the question that hangs in that sudden, terrifying silence is the most important one of all. What would the answer sound like? And could a human mind, or even the fabric of the world itself, survive hearing it? The philosopher's forbidden question hangs in the air, a psychic grenade with the pin pulled. Your attention now turns completely to the woman on the tripod, the epicenter of this entire supernatural event. What was it actually like to be the Pythia? The official accounts are sparse, sanitized by the priests. They speak of a pious, sober life, of a woman chosen for her purity and devotion. But you are now privy to the reality behind the propaganda. You are witnessing the elaborate and terrifying ritual that prepared her for her descent into divine madness. This was not a gentle prayer session. It was a systematic dismantling of the self, a controlled demolition of a human psyche to make room for the serpent. The process begins 3 days before the oracle is scheduled to speak. The Pythia, who for most of the month lives a quiet, cloistered life within the sanctuary complex, is taken into a state of strict isolation. She is allowed no contact with anyone but a few elder priestesses, women who were once Pythias themselves. Their bodies now too frail for the ordeal, but their minds still echoing with the whispers from the chasm. Her diet is severely restricted. She consumes no meat, no wine, nothing that would ground her too firmly in the physical world. Her primary sustenance is a thin barley gruel and water from a specific sacred spring. Not the famous Castalian spring where pilgrims purified themselves, but a different one, a secret spring that bubbles up from deep within the mountain. This is a historical fact mentioned by ancient sources. The Pythia drank from the Cassatus spring, whose waters were said to sink into the ground and re-emerge inside the Adyton itself. She is literally drinking the oracle. The morning of the prophecy, the ritual intensifies. The elder priestesses lead her to the Castalian spring, which bursts from a crevice between the twin shining rocks. The water here is shockingly cold, a jolt to the system. She is ritually bathed, her hair washed and unbound. The icy water meant to purify her body and shock her nervous system into a state of high alert. After the bath, she is dressed in a simple virgin white robe, a stark contrast to the opulence of the temple itself. Then comes the next crucial step. She is given a branch from the sacred laurel tree. The one you remember is nourished by the blood and venom of Python. She begins to chew the leaves. The laurel, you recall, is not a harmless herb. In certain concentrations, its leaves are toxic, containing compounds that can induce a lightheaded, dissociated state. It's another layer of psychoactive input, another key turning in the locks of her mind. A procession of priests, clad in ceremonial purple, then leads her up the sacred way, her bare feet cold on the ancient stones. The air is electric with the anticipation of the waiting crowds, but she sees none of them. Her focus is already turning inward. Her senses are both dulled and heightened. The scent of the laurel is overpowering, and the low hum of the mountain is beginning to build into a symphony in her ears. They reach the temple, but they do not enter the main door. They take her to a small hidden side entrance that leads directly into the forbidden Adyton. The chamber is dark, lit only by a single, flickering torch. The air is already thick with the first tentative wisps of the pneuma rising from the fissure. Here, in the final moments before the possession, the last vestige of Apollo's authority is asserted. A young goat is brought before her. A priest sprinkles cold, sacred water on its head. If the goat shudders violently from head to foot, it is a sign that Apollo is willing to speak. If it does not, the session is cancelled. You watch this bizarre ritual and see it for what it is. A final, desperate attempt by the priests to maintain an illusion of control. They are asking their god for permission to proceed with a ritual that will invoke his mortal enemy. It is a moment of profound, almost comical, theological dissonance. The quirky detail of a quivering goat determining the flow of world events is absurd, yet it was the linchpin of the entire ceremony. The goat shudders. The way is clear. The priests step back, their faces a mixture of reverence and fear. The elder priestesses guide the Pythia, who is now trembling, her eyes wide, to the bronze tripod. They help her onto the cold metal seat, arranging her robes. They whisper the last instructions. The breathing patterns and mental surrenders etched into the tripod's rim, which you saw earlier. Let go, they whisper. Do not fight it. Be the vessel. Be the stream. And then they retreat, leaving her alone, suspended over the abyss. She takes a deep, shuddering breath, the first full inhalation of the concentrated vapors. And the serpent comes for her. You feel her final flicker of selfhood, her personal consciousness, her memories of being a woman, a daughter, a human. And you feel it being snuffed out, not violently, but systematically, like a candle flame being starved of oxygen, placed by a cold, vast, and ancient awareness that has no name. The possession is complete. But the question that arises as you witness this psychological sacrifice is not just about the Pythia, it's about the elder priestesses who guide her. What memories, what echoes of the serpent do they carry within them? And what becomes of a mind that has been a vessel for a god and a monster once it is finally set aside? The Pythia is now an empty vessel, her consciousness extinguished and replaced by the serpent's ancient mind. The ritual is complete, the connection is live. From the outside, it appears as if Apollo, the god of light, is in full control. His priests manage the queue of supplicants, they interpret the prophecies, and they collect the lavish offerings. Delphi becomes a center of immense wealth and political influence, a testament to the power and wisdom of its patron god. But you are now looking behind the golden curtain, into the shadowy back rooms where the true costs of this operation are calculated. You realize that Apollo's control is a facade. He is not a master, but a broker. He has brokered a deal between humanity and the primal entity in the chasm, and like all such bargains with ancient powers, it comes with a hidden price. Every prophecy, every glimpse into the fractured tapestry of fate, demands a payment. The first and most obvious price is paid by the Pythia herself. You have already witnessed the psychological horror of her transformation, the systematic erasure of her identity. But the cost is physical as well. The constant exposure to the toxic vapors and the laurel leaves, combined with the extreme physiological stress of the possession, takes a devastating toll on her body. Historical accounts suggest that while early Pythias were young virgins, the practice later shifted to using women over 50, women who had already lived their lives. This wasn't a matter of moral propriety, it was a practical consideration. The lifespan of a Pythia, once she began her service, was often brutally short. The divine madness burned them out from the inside, leaving them physically wasted and mentally scarred. You see the elder priestesses, the ones who survived? Their hands permanently trembling, their eyes forever fixed on a point somewhere beyond the veil of reality. They are the living receipts for prophecies delivered decades ago. But the price is not limited to the priestess. Cost is exacted from the supplicant as well. This is the hidden bargain of Delphi. The questioner arrives seeking clarity, a straight path through the tangled woods of the future. But the oracle never gives clarity. It gives a riddle, a paradox, a fragment of truth wrapped in layers of ambiguity. This is not a flaw in the system, it is a feature. The prophecy acts like a virus, infecting the mind of the recipient. It plants a seed of doubt, of obsession. The king who is told a great empire will fall no longer sees the world as it is. He sees it through the lens of the prophecy. Every action, every decision, every diplomatic negotiation is now twisted around this single, terrifying phrase. The prophecy doesn't just predict his future, it hijacks his present, consuming his thoughts and driving his actions. The price of the prophecy is the supplicant's own free will. He receives a glimpse of his fate, but in doing so, he becomes shackled to it, often becoming the very instrument of its fulfillment. You think of Apollo himself. What is his role in all this? He is the god of light, of reason, know thesoton, know thyself. Yet his most famous sanctuary is built upon a foundation of intoxication, madness, and primal chaos. This contradiction is not lost on you. You recall a quirky and disturbing detail about the god's own nature. Apollo, the celestial musician, the healer, the bringer of enlightenment, was also a god of plague. His arrows, which could bring sudden death and disease, were feared as much as his lyre was loved. He was a god of terrible duality. He was both the light and the shadow that the light creates. His presence at Delphi is the ultimate expression of this duality. He offers the light of prophecy, but the light is generated by a deep, chthonic darkness that he can barely contain. This is Apollo's hidden bargain. It's in exchange for the immense power and prestige that comes from controlling the world's most famous oracle. He must act as a warden for the very thing he despises. He must lend his name, his authority, and his priests to a power that is fundamentally alien to him. He is the sun god, forced to stare into the abyss. Every prophecy that is uttered in his name is also a victory for the serpent. Every time a king's mind is twisted by a Delphic riddle, it is a triumph for the chaotic, pre-Olympian consciousness that Apollo tried and failed to exterminate. He is trapped in a symbiotic relationship with his mortal enemy. He provides the interface, the brand name, the customer service. The serpent provides the raw, terrifying product. The entire operation is a grand deception, a cosmic bait-and-switch. Mortals come seeking the wisdom of a shining god, and they leave with their minds infected by the whispers of an ancient monster. The price of knowledge is madness. The price of light is a deeper understanding of the dark, and the price for Apollo gets to be the most influential god in the pantheon. But he must forever be the jailer of a prisoner who is silently, patiently, poisoning the minds of his worshippers. The question that surfaces from this grim economy of souls is a practical one. Who in the end is truly getting the better end of this deal? The god, the supplicant, or the serpent? The tragic fate of Croesus serves as a chilling testament to the oracle's psychological power. The prophecy became a self-fulfilling trap, sprung by the king's own ambition. But as you contemplate the victims of Delphi, your thoughts turn from the supplicants back to the priestesses themselves. You remember the immense physical and mental toll of the service, the way it burned them out from the inside. The official narrative is that they served their term and retired to a life of honor and seclusion within the sanctuary. But you sense a darker, more hidden story. You begin to search the psychic echoes of the temple, not for prophecies, but for the fates of the women who spoke them. And you discover something terrifying. Some of them never came back. You're witnessing a prophecy session in the 4th century BCE. The Pythia on the tripod is a woman named Aristonic. She has served for several years, and the priests have noted her increasing fragility. Her trances have become deeper, more violent. And the things she says, the raw data before the priests clean it up, have grown stranger, more disconnected from the questions being asked. She seems to be tuning into a deeper, more chaotic frequency. Today, a delegation from Macedon has asked a question about Philip II's latest military campaign. The goat has shuddered. The rituals are complete. Aristonic inhales the pneuma. But this time, something is different. There is no glossolalia, no ecstatic shrieking. Instead, a profound silence fills the adyton. The Pythia sits perfectly still on the tripod, her back ramrod straight. Her head is tilted back, her mouth slightly open, but no sound emerges. Her eyes, usually wide with terror or vacant with trance, are closed. The priests wait, unnerved by this deviation from the ritual. Minutes stretch into an hour. The air in the chamber grows cold. A senior priest approaches her cautiously, calls her name. There is no response. He reaches out and touches her shoulder. Her skin is icy cold, despite the geothermal heat rising from the fissure. He checks for a pulse, for breath. There is nothing. Aristonic is dead. But as he looks at her face, he sees something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Her eyelids are fluttering rapidly, as if she is in the midst of a vivid dream. Her eyes are moving behind the lids, tracking something that no one else can see. The priests are thrown into a panic. This is a disaster. It is one thing for a Pythia to die from the cumulative strain of her service. It is another for her to die during the ritual itself. It implies a catastrophic failure, a flaw in their process, an anger from the god. They quickly and secretly remove her body from the adyton before the Macedonian delegation grows to suspicious. They announce that the god is unwilling to speak today. But in the private chambers where they lay Aristonoc's body, the mystery only deepens. Her body remains cold and clinically dead, but her eyes continue to move for 3 more days. The priests watch in horrified fascination. What is she seeing? Where has her consciousness gone? It's as if her mind has been permanently disconnected from her body and is now adrift in the timeless, chaotic ocean of the serpent's consciousness. She hasn't just died. She has been assimilated. This was not an isolated incident. You uncover whispers and fragmented records of other Pythias who simply ... vanished. Not just their consciousness, their physical bodies. A priestess in the Hellenistic period who, after a particularly violent trance, was reported to have simply dissolved into a column of shimmering vapor, drawn down into the fissure itself. Another whose body was found, not dead, but petrified, turned to a substance that resembled the limestone of the mountain, her face frozen in an expression of ecstatic horror. These are the stories that were never recorded by historians like Herodotus or Plutarch. They were the sanctuary's deepest, most terrifying secrets, the operational losses that were scrubbed from the official records. We recall a bizarre detail from a completely different mythological tradition, the Norse myths of Odin. Odin, the Allfather, a god of wisdom and prophecy, famously hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and nights, wounded by his own spear to gain knowledge of the runes. It was a ritual of symbolic death and self-sacrifice to unlock forbidden knowledge. The vanishing Pythias, you realize, were undergoing a similar but involuntary sacrifice. They were not just vessels. They were explorers sent on a one-way mission into a hostile inner dimension. Most returned, scarred and broken, but some were lost in transmission. They went too deep, followed the instructions on the tripod too closely perhaps, and their connection to the physical world was permanently severed. The priests of Apollo would have rationalized these disappearances. They would have said that the god had taken his most devoted servants to be with him, a divine reward. But you know the truth. Apollo didn't take them, the serpent did. The ancient, hungry consciousness in the earth, the one Apollo had tried to cage, was still feeding. It had been cheated of its physical form, but it had found a new way to sustain itself, one soul at a time. The position of Pythia was not a holy office. It was a sacrificial lottery. And the most terrifying question that arises from the ghosts of these vanished women is this: were these disappearances accidents? The result of a system under strain? Or were they the intended outcome for the most effective priestesses, a final, terrible price for providing the clearest, most potent prophecies? The horrifying fate of the vanished Pythias lingers in your mind, souls assimilated by the ancient consciousness in the earth. For centuries, this entire supernatural structure balanced on the explanations of myth and religion. The vapors were the breath of God, the madness was divine possession, the ambiguous prophecies were the wisdom of the divine. But now, your perspective shifts dramatically. You are fast-forwarding through time, leaving the ancient world behind. The temple falls silent, the Roman Empire crumbles, and the age of faith gives way to the age of reason. You are now standing at the ruins of Delphi in the late 1990s, not as a pilgrim, but as part of a team of geologists, archaeologists, and chemists. The mystery of the oracle is no longer a theological question. It is a scientific problem to be solved. The team is led by a geologist, Gel de Boer. For decades, consensus among academic historians was that the ancient accounts of the vapors were a myth, fabrication to lend mystique to the oracle. Early archaeological excavations in the late 19th century had found no great chasm, no dramatic fissures beneath the temple floor. The story of the Pneuma was dismissed as pious fantasy. But de Boer and his team have a new theory based on a more detailed understanding of the region's complex geology. They know about the intersection of the Delphi and Kurna fault lines directly beneath the temple. They suspect the ancients were telling the truth. They begin a new, more technologically advanced survey of the site. You watch as they use sophisticated instruments to analyze the travertine rock formations around the temple. They find that the stones are shot through with veins of calcite, deposited by ancient spring water. Crucially, they discover that this water was heated, geothermal in origin. This is the first piece of hard evidence. Then, they analyze the chemical composition of these deposits. The results come back, and they are a bombshell. Trapped within the rock are traces of hydrocarbon gases, including methane, ethane, and most importantly, ethylene. The sweet-smelling gas that induces a trance-like state, the one you witnessed in the chambers below, this is the smoking gun. It's the scientific proof that the mythological vapors were real. The discovery sends a shockwave through the academic community. The ancient writers like Plutarch were not embellishing, they're reporting. The historical fact is now established. The site of the Oracle of Delphi is located on a geologically active spot that releases, or at least once released, psychoactive gases. The scientists have found the how of the oracle. They have explained the mechanism of the trance. A neat, rational, scientific explanation seems to finally tame the mystery. The grand deception of the gods is revealed to be a simple, if rare, geological phenomena combined with clever, priestly stagecraft. Apollo and Python are retired, replaced by fault lines and ethylene. But as you stand there, amidst the jubilant scientists, you realize their discovery does not solve the mystery, deepens it, makes it infinitely more terrifying. If the trances were caused by ethylene, a simple, known chemical compound, then how do you explain the content of the prophecies? How do you explain the chilling accuracy of the warning to the Athenians about the wooden wall? How do you explain the oracle knowing the precise, absurd details of Croesus's tortoise and lamb stew? Ethylene can cause hallucinations, but it cannot grant clairvoyance, cannot provide access to specific, verifiable information across vast distances of space and time. The scientific explanation has accounted for the state of the Pythia's mind, but it has utterly failed to account for the information that entered it. You recall a bizarre detail from the world of quantum physics, the concept of entanglement. Two particles can be linked in such a way that if you measure a property of one, you instantly know the property of the other, no matter how far apart they are. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. It's a scientifically proven phenomenon that defies our classical understanding of space and time. The ethylene, you now theorize, was not just a simple intoxicant. It was a catalyst for a form of biological quantum entanglement. It was a chemical key that temporarily rewired the neurons of the Pythia's brain, allowing her consciousness to become entangled with the wider information field of the planitor, perhaps something even larger. She wasn't just high, she was logged in. Her brain became a quantum receiver. The information about Croesus's stew didn't travel from Sardis to Delphi through any conventional means. It was accessed instantaneously, because in that entangled state there was no distance to travel. This new synthesis of ancient myth and modern science is far more frightening than either one alone. The priests weren't just manipulating a drugged woman. They were attempting to manage a human being whose mind was temporarily operating outside the known laws of classical physics. They were firefighters battling a psychic inferno with buckets of ritual and poetry. The ethylene discovery doesn't debunk the supernatural elements of the story. It provides a potential physical mechanism for them. It yanks the oracle out of the realm of pure myth and places it squarely in the unsettling borderlands of neuroscience, geology, and quantum mechanics. The geological conspiracy is not that the scientists are hiding something, but that their own discovery has opened a Pandora's box of new, more terrifying questions. And the most pressing of these questions is this: if a specific combination of geology and brain chemistry can create a gateway like this, are there other such places on Earth? Are there other fault lines? Other gas vents? Other potential oracles lying dormant, waiting for the right conditions, or the right person to switch them back on? The tragic fate of Croesus serves as a chilling testament to the oracle's psychological power. The prophecy became a self-fulfilling trap, sprung by the king's own ambition. But as you contemplate the victims of Delphi, your thoughts turn from the supplicants back to the priestesses themselves. You remember the immense physical and mental toll of the service, the way it burned them out from the inside. The official narrative is that they served their term and retired to a life of honor and seclusion within the sanctuary. But you sense a darker, more hidden story. You begin to search the psychic echoes of the temple, not for prophecies, but for the fates of the women who spoke them. And you discover something terrifying. Some of them never came back. You're witnessing a prophecy session in the 4th century BCE. The Pythia on the tripod is a woman named Aristonic. She has served for several years, and the priests have noted her increasing fragility. Her trances have become deeper, more violent. And the things she says, the raw data before the priests clean it up, have grown stranger, more disconnected from the questions being asked. She seems to be tuning into a deeper, more chaotic frequency. Today, a delegation from Macedon has asked a question about Philip II's latest military campaign. The goat has shuddered. The rituals are complete. Aristonic inhales the pneuma. But this time, something is different. There is no glossolalia, no ecstatic shrieking. Instead, a profound silence fills the adyton. The Pythia sits perfectly still on the tripod, her back ramrod straight. Her head is tilted back, her mouth slightly open, but no sound emerges. Her eyes, usually wide with terror or vacant with trance, are closed. The priests wait, unnerved by this deviation from the ritual. Minutes stretch into an hour. The air in the chamber grows cold. A senior priest approaches her cautiously. He calls her name. There is no response. He reaches out and touches her shoulder. Her skin is icy cold, despite the geothermal heat rising from the fissure. He checks for a pulse, for breath. There is nothing. Aristonic is dead. But as he looks at her face, he sees something that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Her eyelids are fluttering rapidly as if she is in the midst of a vivid dream. Her eyes are moving behind the lids, tracking something that no one else can see. The priests are thrown into a panic. This is a disaster. It is one thing for a Pythia to die from the cumulative strain of her service. It is another for her to die during the ritual itself. It implies a catastrophic failure, a flaw in their process, an anger from the god. They quickly and secretly remove her body from the adyton before the Macedonian delegation grows too suspicious. They announce that the god is unwilling to speak today, but in the private chambers where they lay Aristonic's body, the mystery only deepens. Her body remains cold and clinically dead, but her eyes continue to move for 3 more days. The priests watch in horrified fascination. What is she seeing? Where has her consciousness gone? It's as if her mind has been permanently disconnected from her body and is now adrift in the timeless, chaotic ocean of the serpent's consciousness. She hasn't just died. She has been assimilated. This was not an isolated incident. You uncover whispers and fragmented records of other Pythias who simply ... vanished. Not just their consciousness, but their physical bodies. A priestess in the Hellenistic period who, after a particularly violent trance, was reported to have simply dissolved into a column of shimmering vapor drawn down into the fissure itself. Another whose body was found, not dead, but petrified. Turned to a substance that resembled the limestone of the mountain, her face frozen in an expression of ecstatic horror. These are the stories that were never recorded by historians like Herodotus or Plutarch. They were the sanctuary's deepest, most terrifying secrets, the operational losses that were scrubbed from the official records. You recall a bizarre detail from a completely different mythological tradition, the Norse myths of Odin. Odin, the Allfather, a god of wisdom and prophecy, famously hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and nights, wounded by his own spear, to gain knowledge of the runes. It was a ritual of symbolic death and self-sacrifice to unlock forbidden knowledge. The vanishing Pythias, you realize, were undergoing a similar but involuntary sacrifice. They were not just vessels. They were explorers, sent on a one-way mission into a hostile inner dimension. Most returned, scarred and broken. But some were lost in transmission. They went too deep, followed the instructions on the tripod too closely perhaps, and their connection to the physical world was permanently severed. The priests of Apollo would have rationalized these disappearances. They would have said that the god had taken his most devoted servants to be with him, a divine reward. But you know the truth. Apollo didn't take them. The serpent did. The ancient, hungry consciousness in the earth, the one Apollo had tried to cage, was still feeding. It had been cheated of its physical form, but it had found a new way to sustain itself, one soul at a time. The position of Pythia was not a holy office. It was a sacrificial lottery. And the most terrifying question that arises from the ghosts of these vanished women is this: were these disappearances accidents, the result of a system under strain? Or were they the intended outcome for the most effective priestesses, a final, terrible price for providing the clearest, most potent prophecies? The horrifying fate of the vanished Pythias lingers in your mind, souls assimilated by the ancient consciousness in the earth. For centuries, this entire supernatural structure balanced on the explanations of myth and religion. The vapors were the breath of God, the madness was divine possession, the ambiguous prophecies were the wisdom of the divine. But now, your perspective shifts dramatically. You are fast-forwarding through time, leaving the ancient world behind. The temple falls silent, the Roman Empire crumbles, and the age of faith gives way to the age of reason. You are now standing at the ruins of Delphi in the late 1990s, not as a pilgrim, but as part of a team of geologists, archaeologists, and chemists. The mystery of the oracle is no longer a theological question. It is a scientific problem to be solved. The team is led by a geologist, Gel de Boer. For decades, consensus among academic historians was that the ancient accounts of the vapors were a myth, fabrication to lend mystique to the oracle. Early archaeological excavations in the late 19th century had found no great chasm, no dramatic fissures beneath the temple floor. The story of the Pneuma was dismissed as pious fantasy. But de Boer and his team have a new theory based on a more detailed understanding of the region's complex geology. They know about the intersection of the Delphi and Kurna fault lines directly beneath the temple. They suspect the ancients were telling the truth. They begin a new, more technologically advanced survey of the site. You watch as they use sophisticated instruments to analyze the travertine rock formations around the temple. They find that the stones are shot through with veins of calcite, deposited by ancient spring water. Crucially, they discover that this water was heated, geothermal in origin. This is the first piece of hard evidence. Then, they analyze the chemical composition of these deposits. The results come back and they are a bombshell. Trapped within the rock are traces of hydrocarbon gases, including methane, ethane, and most importantly, ethylene. The sweet-smelling gas that induces a trance-like state, the one you witnessed in the chambers below. This is the smoking gun, scientific proof that the mythological vapors were real. The discovery sends a shockwave through the academic community. The ancient writers, like Plutarch, were not embellishing. They were reporting. The historical fact is now established. The site of the Oracle of Delphi is located on a geologically active spot that releases, or at least once released, psychoactive gases. The scientists have found the how of the oracle. They have explained the mechanism of the trance. A neat, rational, scientific explanation seems to finally tame the mystery. The grand deception of the gods is revealed to be a simple, if rare, geological phenomena combined with clever, priestly stagecraft. Apollo and Python are retired, replaced by fault lines and ethylene. But as you stand there, amidst the jubilant scientists, you realize their discovery does not solve the mystery, deepens it, makes it infinitely more terrifying. If the trances were caused by ethylene, a simple, known chemical compound, then how do you explain the content of the prophecies? How do you explain the chilling accuracy of the warning to the Athenians about the wooden wall? How do you explain the oracle knowing the precise, absurd details of Croesus's tortoise and lamb stew? Ethylene can cause hallucinations, but it cannot grant clairvoyance, cannot provide access to specific, verifiable information across vast distances of space and time. The scientific explanation has accounted for the state of the Pythia's mind, but it has utterly failed to account for the information that entered it. You recall a bizarre detail from the world of quantum physics, the concept of entanglement. Two particles can be linked in such a way that if you measure a property of one, you instantly know the property of the other, no matter how far apart they are. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. It's a scientifically proven phenomenon that defies our classical understanding of space and time. The ethylene, you now theorize, was not just a simple intoxicant. It was a catalyst for a form of biological quantum entanglement. It was a chemical key that temporarily rewired the neurons of the Pythia's brain, allowing her consciousness to become entangled with the wider information field of the Planitor, perhaps something even larger. She wasn't just high. She was logged in. Her brain became a quantum receiver. The information about Croesus's stew didn't travel from Sardis to Delphi through any conventional means. It was accessed instantaneously, because in that entangled state there was no distance to travel. This new synthesis of ancient myth and modern science is far more frightening than either one alone. The priests weren't just manipulating a drugged woman. They were attempting to manage a human being whose mind was temporarily operating outside the known laws of classical physics. They were firefighters battling a psychic inferno with buckets of ritual and poetry. The ethylene discovery doesn't debunk the supernatural elements of the story. It provides a potential physical mechanism for them. It yanks the oracle out of the realm of pure myth and places it squarely in the unsettling borderlands of neuroscience, geology, and quantum mechanics. The geological conspiracy is not that the scientists are hiding something, but that their own discovery has opened a Pandora's box of new, more terrifying questions. And the most pressing of these questions is this: if a specific combination of geology and brain chemistry can create a gateway like this, are there other such places on Earth? Are there other fault lines? Other gas vents? Other potential oracles lying dormant, waiting for the right conditions, or the right person to switch them back on? The chilling possibility that other dormant oracles might exist across the globe hangs in the air. The scientific discovery of ethylene, instead of closing the book on Delphi, has opened a terrifying new chapter. But a geopolitical force as powerful as the oracle does not exist in a vacuum. Your focus now shifts from the supernatural and scientific to the political. You are looking at the intricate web of power that surrounded, protected, and ultimately exploited the sanctuary at Delphi. This was not just a holy site, it was a multinational corporation, a supreme court, and a geopolitical weapon all rolled into one. And its board of directors was a body known as the Amphictyonic League. The League was an ancient association of Greek tribes and city-states, originally formed to protect and manage the great sanctuaries of Delphi and Demeter at Anthula. The surface, it was a pious organization, responsible for the temple's upkeep, the safety of pilgrims, and the hosting of the Pythian Games. They were the custodians of the sacred. But in reality, the League was one of the most powerful political bodies in ancient Greece. Membership conferred immense prestige, and control of the League meant control of Delphi. And control of Delphi, as you now well know, meant the ability to influence the flow of prophecy. The history of the League is a history of brutal power politics, fought not with armies, but with accusations of sacrilege and the subtle manipulation of divine utterances. You witness a meeting of the League's council in the 4th century BCE. The delegates from Athens, Sparta, Thebes, and other powerful states are gathered. The air is thick with suspicion and barely concealed animosity. They are not discussing theology. They are discussing a sacred war, the state of Phocis, in whose territory Delphi was located, had seized control of the sanctuary, and in a shocking act of sacrilege, had used the accumulated treasures to fund a mercenary army. The other members of the League are outraged not just by the impiety, but by the loss of their control over the oracle. They vote to raise an army to crush the Phocians and liberate the sanctuary. This historical event, the Third Sacred War, was a brutal, decade-long conflict sparked entirely by the struggle for control over the oracle. It demonstrates unequivocally that the rulers of Greece viewed the oracle not as an infallible divine voice, but as a strategic asset to be captured and controlled. This political manipulation is the key to understanding how the oracle functioned on a macro level. If a powerful state like Athens wanted to persuade its reluctant allies to join a war, a well-timed, ambiguous prophecy from Delphi could be invaluable. The wooden wall will save you. Was that Apollo speaking? Or was it a message crafted by the priests in consultation with the Athenian delegates on the Amphictyonic Council? The system was ripe for corruption. The priests, while holding immense power, were not immune to political pressure or indeed to outright bribery, while the Pythia herself was likely incorruptible, lost in her trance. The men who translated her words were all too human. They had families, political allegiances, and a vested interest in maintaining the temple's wealth and influence. But as you watch this cynical game of political chess unfold over the centuries, you notice something strange. The oracle seems to have a will of its own. It occasionally bites the hand that feeds it. There are numerous instances where the prophecies issued by Delphi were directly contrary to the interests of the dominant power on the council. During the Persian Wars, the oracle initially gave prophecies of doom and gloom, advising surrender, a message that was profoundly unhelpful to the Greek war effort. The priests had to scramble, allowing the envoys to ask again to get a more useful answer. It's as if there were two forces at work: the political machinations of the League, constantly trying to steer the prophecies, and something else, something wild and unpredictable, fighting back from within the Ataton. This internal resistance, you realize, is the serpent. The chthonic consciousness in the chasm has no interest in the petty squabbles of city-states. It is not Athenian or Spartan. It is an ancient planetary intelligence, and its perspective is geological, not political. The priests and the League could shape the output. They could edit the raw data, but they could not completely control the source. Every now and then, a piece of raw, untamable truth would burst through their filters. A prophecy so clear, so specific, and so politically inconvenient that they had no choice but to report it. You remember a quirky detail about the goddess Athena, Apollo's half-sister, and the patron of Athens. While a goddess of wisdom and strategy, she was also known by the epithet primordial, she who fights in front. She was a warrior goddess, a frontline combatant. This duality mirrors the situation at Delphi. The priests were fighting a constant battle on two fronts: externally, to maintain political control and influence, and internally, a desperate, moment by moment, struggle to contain and interpret the chaotic intelligence of the Pythia's trance. The Amphictyonic League, for all its power, was not the master of the oracle. It was a rider on the back of a tiger. They could try to steer it, they could profit from its fearsome reputation. But they knew that at any moment the beast could turn on them. Their attempts to control the uncontrollable, or to put a political saddle on a cosmic force, were doomed to be only partially successful. The oracle was a loose cannon at the heart of Greek geopolitics. Its unpredictability was, paradoxically, a key part of its power and credibility. If it only ever told people what they wanted to hear, it would have quickly been exposed as a fraud. It was the moments when it spoke a terrifying, inconvenient truth that reinforced its divine authority. But the question that arises from this constant political struggle is a subtle one. Were the priests who occasionally allowed these rogue prophecies to be released acting out of piety and a genuine fear of the god? Or were they acting out of a deeper fear of the serpent, deliberately leaking its raw power as a warning to their political masters not to push their control too far? The image of the Amphictyonic League as a nervous rider on a cosmic tiger fades, and a new figure strides onto the world stage. He is a man who is not content to simply ride the tiger, intends to tame it. It is 336 BCE, and a young, astonishingly ambitious Macedonian king has just ascended the throne. His name is Alexander. He has inherited from his father, Philip II, not just a kingdom and a superbly trained army, but a grand, audacious plan: the invasion of the Persian Empire. Before he embarks on a campaign that will change the face of the world, he knows he must come here, to Delphi. He needs the oracle's stamp of approval, not just for his own peace of mind, but as a crucial piece of propaganda to unite the fractious Greek states behind him. You see him arrive not as a humble supplicant, but as a conqueror. He strides up the sacred way, his generals and elite guard in tow, his presence radiating an almost inhuman confidence. He is the son of a king, but his mother, the formidable Olympias, has whispered to him that his true father is Zeus himself. Alexander believes he is a demigod, and he has come to consult with his brother Apollo. But he arrives on a day that is apophorous, an inauspicious or forbidden day. The oracle is closed. The priests, adhering to the ancient traditions, inform him that the Pythia cannot be consulted. The god will not speak. For any other king, this would be a devastating setback, a terrible omen. They would retreat, offer more sacrifices, and wait for a more favorable day. But Alexander is not any other king. He does not take no for an answer, not from men, and certainly not from the unseen forces of a god. You watch in disbelief as he brushes past the horrified priests and marches directly toward the inner sanctum. The guards at the door try to block his path, but they shrink back from the sheer force of his will, the blazing intensity in his eyes. He storms into the residential quarters of the sanctuary where the Pythia is living in her state of quiet seclusion. He finds her an old woman, perhaps startled from her reading or her prayers, and he grabs her by the arm, begins to drag her, physically, towards the temple. The Pythia resists, crying out, pleading with him that the laws forbid it. "I will not go," she protests. But Alexander is a whirlwind, a force of nature. He pulls her along the stone corridors, his grip like iron. "I must have an answer," he snarls. Finally, exhausted and terrified, realizing she has no choice, the priestess gives up. As he drags her into the adyton, she looks at him, not with the serene gaze of a holy woman, but with the exasperated fury of someone whose world has been turned upside down by a spoiled, impossibly powerful youth. And she utters the prophecy he has come for. "My son," she cries out, "you are invincible." Anakatos eiopai. Alexander stops. A slow smile spreads across his face. He releases her arm. "That is the answer I need," he says. He turns and strides out of the temple, leaving the shaken priests and the terrified Pythia in his wake. He has what he came for. He doesn't need a cryptic verse, a poetic riddle. He has received a direct, unambiguous statement of his destiny. He will now go on to conquer the known world, his belief in his own invincibility, confirmed by the holiest oracle in Greece. This historical anecdote is a famous testament to Alexander's character. But with your knowledge of the oracle's true nature, you see it in a much darker light. Did the Pythia, in that moment of terror and frustration, actually channel Apollo? Or did she, a mortal woman under extreme duress, simply shout the first thing that came to her mind to make the terrifying young man let go of her? Was "you are invincible" a divine prophecy, or was it a desperate plea? It's impossible to know. But in that moment, the entire system of Delphi was short-circuited. Alexander didn't follow the rules. He didn't offer the sacrifices. He didn't wait for the auspicious day. He didn't submit his question to the priests. He bypassed the entire Apollonian framework, the elaborate system of filters and interpretations. He went straight to the source, to the human component of the oracle, and extracted an answer through brute force. You think of a quirky detail from Alexander's later life. After his conquests, He founded dozens of cities, many named Alexandria. But he also had a beloved horse, Bucephalus, who had been with him since childhood. When the horse died in India, Alexander founded a city and named it Bucephala in its honor. He was a man of immense sentiment and loyalty, but also of absolute world-bending ego. He saw the world as an extension of his own will. For him, the Pythia was not a sacred vessel. She was an instrument, and he played her. The prophecy she gave him, whether divine or not, haunted his empire. He proved to be, for a time, invincible, never lost a battle. But the word anikatos has a subtle, double meaning. But it can mean unconquered, but it can also mean unconquerable in the sense of being untamable. Wild and ultimately self-destructive. His invincibility led him to push ever onward, deeper into Asia, far beyond the limits of his men's endurance. His own generals eventually had to force him to turn back. He died young, in Babylon, his vast empire immediately shattering into warring factions. His invincibility did not grant him immortality. The prophecy, like all Delphic prophecies, was a double-edged sword. It fueled his rise and arguably precipitated his fall. The question that remains as you watch his ghost stride triumphantly out of the temple is one of ultimate responsibility. Did the oracle make Alexander? Or did Alexander, by forcing his will upon the system, remake the oracle into a mirror of his own titanic and ultimately fatal ambition? Alexander's forced prophecy marks a turning point. A moment where the raw will of a single man overwhelmed the ancient, intricate system of the oracle. The reverence and terror that had surrounded Delphi for centuries had been breached. The precedent was set. The oracle could be bullied. Your perspective now shifts forward again, into a new era dominated by a power even more pragmatic and ruthless than Alexander. You are in the age of Rome. The legions have conquered Greece, and the once proud city-states are now provinces in a vast, sprawling empire. The Romans, a deeply superstitious people, are fascinated by the oracle at Delphi, but they also view it with suspicion. It is a foreign power center, a relic of the people they have conquered, and its pronouncements are not so easily controlled as their own state-sanctioned auguries. You witness the arrival of a Roman proconsul in the 1st century BCE. He is not here to ask a question. He is here on a mission of reorganization. This is a euphemism. He is here to assert Roman dominance. He inspects the treasuries, his eyes lingering on the centuries of accumulated gold and silver. He reads the histories of the oracle, noting its influence over past wars and political alliances. He sees not a sacred mystery, but a potential source of rebellion, a rallying point for Greek nationalism. The Roman policy towards Delphi becomes one of slow, systematic suppression. They do not destroy it outright. That would be a sacrilege too far, even for them. Instead, they bleed it dry. The Emperor Nero, in the 1st century CE, famously visits Greece. He participates in the Olympic and Pythian Games, shamelessly winning every competition he enters. While at Delphi, he does not ask for a prophecy. Instead, he helps himself to the temple's treasures, carting away over 500 bronze and gold statues to adorn his palaces in Rome. It is a profound act of desecration, a looting disguised as cultural appreciation. But it is also a message. Your God's treasures, and by extension your God's power, now belong to Rome. The oracle's financial independence, the source of much of its political autonomy, is crippled. But the attempts at suppression are not just financial, they are physical. The Roman general Sulla, decades before Nero, needed funds for his war against Mithridates. He sent a soldier to Delphi with orders to empty the treasuries. When the priests protested, the soldier reportedly heard the sound of Apollo's lyre playing from within the atone. Terrified, he sent a message back to Sulla, who mockingly replied that the god was clearly in a good mood and wished to share his wealth. The looting proceeded. Yet, a string of bizarre accidents began to plague the Roman officials who were most directly involved in the sanctuary's desecration. A proconsul who ordered a new, more orderly Roman-style plaza to be built over a sacred grove was found dead in his bed, his face frozen in a mask of terror. A tax collector responsible for cataloging the temple's remaining valuables was struck by lightning on a clear, sunny day. These incidents are dismissed by Roman authorities as coincidence, as the superstitious imaginings of the conquered Greeks. But you, with your knowledge of the forces at play, sense something else. This is the sanctuary's defense system kicking in. It is not Apollo, the Olympian god, who is retaliating. He has been sidelined, his authority co-opted, and then dismissed by the new masters of the world. Wilder power lashing out. The serpent, the chthonic consciousness bound to the place, is reacting to the threat. Its methods are not the grand open warfare of armies. They are subtle, targeted, and terrifyingly personal. It is the power of the place itself, the strange electromagnetic fields. The psychic residue, the deep ancient intelligence, inserting its influence in small, lethal ways. It is a guerrilla war fought with coincidence and fear. You recall a quirky and telling detail of Roman religion? The Romans had a specific category of gods called the diegets, the indigenous gods. These were the original native spirits of the land, before the great Olympian-style gods were imported and syncretized. The Romans were always careful to propitiate these local spirits when they conquered a new territory, believing them to hold a deep, ancient power over the place itself. In their arrogance, they failed to recognize that at Delphi, they were not dealing with a minor local spirit. They were dealing with a planetary-level consciousness. Their attempts to pave over it, to tax it, to suppress it, were like trying to put a leash on an earthquake. The Emperor Julian, known as the Apostate for his attempt to restore paganism in the 4th century CE, made one last desperate attempt to revive the oracle, sent his trusted physician, Oribasius, to Delphi with funds to rebuild the temple. The sanctuary was by now largely in ruins, its priests scattered, its power a faint memory. Oribasius managed to find the last Pythia, a poor elderly woman living in the shadow of the crumbling sanctuary. He asked for one final prophecy. The answer she gave was not a riddle, it was a eulogy. "Tell the king," she said, "the Pharaoh hall has fallen to the ground. Phoebus Apollo no longer has his house, nor his prophetic laurel, nor his speaking spring. The murmuring water is silent. It is the oracle's official death certificate. Apollo, the shining god, has been evicted. His infrastructure is gone." But the Pythia's words are precise. She speaks of Apollo's hall, Apollo's laurel, Apollo's spring. She does not say that the chasm is closed. She does not say that the serpent is dead. She only says that the Apollonian superstructure, the Olympian franchise that had operated here for over 1,000 years, has gone out of business. The Roman suppression had succeeded in silencing Apollo. But the question that echoes from the ruins, a question that would have terrified any Roman who understood the true nature of the place, is this: by demolishing the prison, had they inadvertently set the prisoner free? The final prophecy echoes in the desolate ruins. The murmuring water is silent. The Apollonian franchise is officially bankrupt. The Roman Empire and the Christian faith that followed it has successfully dismantled the temple, silenced the priests, and scattered the followers. The great oracle of Delphi, which for a millennium had dictated the course of history, is now nothing more than a tourist attraction for melancholic poets and a quarry for local builders. The world moves on, believing the age of oracles and gods is over, but you know better. You know that the silence of Apollo is not the silence of the mountain. You are now delving into the most hidden corners of the sanctuary's long history, searching for evidence of what the priests did when they saw the end coming. You find yourself in a hidden scriptorium, a secret library buried deep within the warren of administrative buildings behind the temple. It is the late 4th century CE. The Emperor Theodosius has just issued his edicts, outlawing all pagan worship. Christian zealots are beginning to tear down the old temples. The priests of Delphi, the last in a long line stretching back 1,000 years, know that the end is not just near, it has arrived. They are not frantically praying to Apollo for deliverance. They are engaged in a desperate, clandestine act of preservation. But they are not trying to save the gold or the statues. They are trying to save the knowledge. You watch as they sort through scrolls, their faces illuminated by flickering oil lamps. They are dividing their library into 2 parts. The first part consists of the official histories, the sanitized accounts of prophecies, the theological treatises on the nature of Apollo, the public-facing documents of the faith. These, they know, will be destroyed. They are a lost cause. But the second part is what they are trying to save. These are the Forbidden Scrolls. These are the texts that were never meant to be seen by anyone outside the highest echelons of the priesthood. These are the internal operational manuals of the oracle. You unroll one of the scrolls. It is not a hymn to Apollo. It is a detailed astronomical text, charting the movements of celestial bodies with a precision that seems impossible for the era. But it also charts their supposed resonance with the seismic activity of the mountain, suggesting that the mood of the oracle could be predicted by the alignment of the planets. Another scroll is a pharmacological treatise, detailing the precise effects of the laurel leaves, the waters of the Casada spring, and, in heavily coded language, the pneuma itself. It describes how to increase or decrease the intensity of the Pythia's trance by subtly altering these inputs. It is a work of advanced empirical neuroscience, disguised as religious ritual. And then you find the most forbidden text of all. It is a small, tightly bound scroll, its parchment worn thin from centuries of secret study. The title, written in a crabbed, ancient script, is the Serpent's Dialogue. This is not a manual for controlling the Pythia. This is a manual for bypassing Apollo entirely. It is the full, unredacted instruction set that was merely hinted at in the engravings on the tripod. It describes in terrifyingly lucid detail a ritual that a Pythia could perform to open a direct, unfiltered, and permanent channel to the consciousness in the chasm. The ritual is a terrifying inversion of the standard Apollonian procedure. It involves not just chewing the laurel leaves, but consuming them in a specific, highly toxic quantity. It involves a prolonged period of sensory deprivation in a chamber deep beneath the temple, and it culminates in a series of chanted vibrations, not words, but pure frequencies, designed to resonate with the geological hum of the mountain and the bronze of the tripod. The text describes this not as a way to receive a prophecy, but as a method of aphapsis, the direct merging you recall from the Eleusinian mysteries. It is a ritual of apotheosis, not into the light of Olympus, but into the dark, collective consciousness of the earth. It is, in short, a method for deliberately inducing the state that caused the Pythias to vanish. It is a recipe for psychic suicide and spiritual assimilation. The bizarre detail you notice in the margins of this scroll are the annotations. Generations of high priests have added their own notes, their warnings, their terrified observations. One note from the classical period reads, "The 8th chant opens the final door. Aristonic attempted it. We did not see her again. You remember her name? The Pythia whose eyes kept moving after her body had died." Another note from the Roman era says, "The thirst becomes unbearable. She must not be allowed to drink from the chasm itself." It implies that at the peak of the trance, the Pythia feels a compulsion to physically consume the source of the power. The priests know they cannot save the sanctuary, so they are saving the source code. They are not burying these scrolls at Delphi. That would be the first place the new authorities would look. Instead, you see them making copies, entrusting them to loyal initiates who are instructed to carry them away, to hide them in libraries in Alexandria, in the secret collections of Gnostic sects in the Near East, in the monasteries of the Egyptian desert. They are turning the forbidden knowledge into a decentralized network, a hidden virus waiting for a new host. They are ensuring that the Serpent's Dialogue will not end with the silence of Apollo. They are planting seeds for a future, long after they are gone, when someone might once again find the right place, the right time, and the right knowledge to reopen the channel. The question that burns from these forbidden scrolls is not just what they contained, but where they ended up. In what hidden libraries or secret societies does this terrifying knowledge still lie dormant, waiting for a new reader brave or foolish enough to turn the page? The image of the forbidden scrolls being smuggled out of Delphi, a diaspora of dangerous knowledge, fades from your mind. The ancient world with its priests and rituals dissolves, and you find yourself suspended in a place of pure theory, a conceptual space where the threads of this entire mystery, the geology, the neurochemistry, the myths, the politics, are beginning to weave themselves together into a single terrifying tapestry. You are no longer just observing. You are formulating a final, grand hypothesis. You're constructing the neural gateway theory. The theory begins with a simple premise. The human brain is not a generator of consciousness, but a receiver. It is a highly complex biological radio tuned, for the most part, to a single, narrow frequency, which we call normal, everyday reality. Our senses, our language, our perception of linear time, these are all functions of this specific tuning. We live our lives on one channel, convinced it is the only one that exists. But the brain, like any sophisticated receiver, has the potential to be retuned. It has dormant capacities, latent circuits that are designed to pick up other frequencies, other realities. These are the parts of the brain that ancient spiritual traditions have always sought to access through meditation, fasting, and psychoactive sacraments. The oracle at Delphi, your theory proposes, was a place where all the necessary elements for a forced high-intensity retuning came together. It was a perfect storm of environmental and biochemical factors. First, you have the geological foundation, the intersection of two major fault lines creating a constant, low-frequency, seismic hum, and powerful electromagnetic field fluctuations. This is the carrier wave, the background signal. Second, you have the chemical trigger, the ethylene-rich vapors rising from the chasm. This, the tuning knob. The ethylene doesn't create the visions. It unlocks the brain's latent perceptual hardware, temporarily disables the default mode network, the part of the brain responsible for maintaining our sense of self and our place in linear time. It opens the receiver to other channels. What is the channel it tunes into? It is the channel of the serpent, the chthonic consciousness. But what is that in scientific terms? Your theory posits that it is the planet's own information field, vast complex network of stored data, a kind of biological and geological internet. It contains the psychic residue of every living thing that has ever existed, the memory stored in the very rocks and water. It is a field that does not operate on a linear timeline. For this planetary consciousness, past, present, and future are all coexisting states of probability. This is why the Pythia could see the future. She wasn't predicting. Her retuned brain was simply accessing a data point from a nonlinear information system. The Pythia's brain, therefore, was the gateway. The neural gateway. The rituals, the fasting, the sacred water. The laurel leaves were the access protocols, designed to prime her brain for the chemical retuning. The bronze tripod was the amplifier, its metallic properties focusing the electromagnetic fields and stabilizing the connection. The entire system, developed over centuries of trial and error, was a form of neurotechnology. The priests of Apollo were not just religious figures. They were technicians of the sacred, specialists in applied neuroscience. Even if they didn't understand the scientific principles behind what they were doing, this theory neatly explains the most baffling aspects of the oracle. The accuracy of the prophecies is accounted for by the access to a nonlinear information field. The physical and mental toll on the Pythia is explained by the extreme neurological stress of having her brain forcibly retuned to a terrifyingly alien frequency.
All the vanishings
Are cases where the retuning was so powerful and complete that the brainious connection to the body as autonomic systems was permanently severed, a fatal system crash. You remember a quirky, bizarre detail from your own modern world. The God helmet. It is an experimental device created by neuroscientist Michael Persinger, which uses weak, complex magnetic fields to stimulate the temporal lobes of the brain. A significant number of subjects who wore the helmet reported profound spiritual experiences, a sense of a sensed presence, of being in the room with a non-physical entity, whether they were religious or not. This is a crude, modern, technological echo of what was happening organically at Delphi. The combination of the fault lines' magnetic fields and the ethylene vapors was a natural, industrial-strength God helmet. The difference is that at Delphi, there really was a presence to be sensed, the ancient alien intelligence of the planet itself. The neural gateway theory is both elegant and profoundly disturbing. It suggests that our reality is far more porous than we believe. It implies that the capacity for prophecy, for clairvoyance, and for connection to a wider consciousness is not a supernatural gift, but a latent function of our own biology, waiting for the right key to unlock it. The magic of the oracle was not magic at all. It was a forgotten science of the mind. The forbidden aspect of this magic was not that it was evil, but that it revealed the terrifyingly fragile and arbitrary nature of our own consensus reality. It proved that the channel we are all tuned to is not the only one. And the question that this theory leaves you with is the most personal and frightening of all. If our brains are receivers and the oracle was a way to change the channel, what channel are you tuned to right now, and who or what is broadcasting? The neural gateway theory hangs in your mind, a chillingly plausible explanation for the entire Delphic mystery. The question of what channel you are tuned to right now feels uncomfortably real. Your journey through time is nearing its end, and you find yourself back in the 4th century CE, the very moment of the oracle's official closure. You are standing beside Oribasius, the envoy of the Emperor Julian, as he receives the last sad prophecy from the final Pythia. The murmuring water is silent, she says, a death notice for a god. The Roman Empire is embracing a new faith, and the old ways are being systematically dismantled. The world sees this as the final victory of light over superstition, of order over chaos. But you are about to witness the oracle's parting shot, its true final prophecy. After delivering the eulogy for Apollo's fallen hall, the Pythia, a weary, forgotten old woman, falls silent. Oribasius, satisfied that his mission is complete and the news is grim enough to please the Christian court, prepares to leave. But then, something changes. A tremor, not of the earth, but of the air itself, runs through the ruined Adyton. The Pythia, who had been slumped in exhaustion, slowly straightens her back. Her eyes, which had been clouded with age and sorrow, suddenly clear, and they burn with an intensity that has not been seen in this place for 100 years. This is not the voice of Apollo's servant. This is the serpent's last stand. She is not speaking to Oribasius. She is not speaking to the Emperor Julian. She is speaking to you, to the future. Her voice is not the ecstatic shriek of the old trances, nor is it the weak whisper of a moment ago. It is a low, clear, resonant tone, a voice that sounds like stone in time itself. The sun god's house is empty, she begins, her words no longer a lament, but a statement of fact. His light was borrowed, and the loan has been recalled. The warden has fled his post. You who come after you, children of the one God, you believe you have conquered the mountain. You believe you have silenced the abyss. You have done nothing. You've only broken the locks on the cage. The air grows colder. The shadows in the corners of the ruined temple seem to deepen and writhe. For 1,000 years, she continues, her gaze fixed on something far beyond the crumbling walls. We kept the bargain. We filtered the chaos. We translated the madness into riddles and rhymes to protect your fragile minds. We gave you glimpses of the storm through a keyhole. You have sealed the keyhole, but you have not calmed the storm. You've only ensured that when it comes, you will be unprepared. The historical record, of course, does not contain this part of the prophecy. Oribasius only reported the first part, the eulogy for Apollo. This second part was for a different audience. This was the serpent's message in a bottle, a final transmission before the station went dark. She describes what is to come, not in the ambiguous poetry of Apollo, but with the terrifying clarity of the chasm itself. She speaks not of the fall of Rome, that is a trivial, short-term event from her perspective. She speaks of a new age, an age of perfect light and perfect shadow. She describes a world where humanity, convinced of its own singular truth, will build empires of reason and logic, shining towers of certainty that will cast shadows of unparalleled darkness. She speaks of a time when humanity will forget the language of the earth, when they will see the world not as a living being but as a dead resource to be exploited. She foresees the poisoning of the waters, the fouling of the air, the fever of the planet itself. She speaks of a time when humanity, having silenced the oracles of the earth, will create their own artificial oracles, vast interconnected networks of information that will offer a different kind of prophecy, a prophecy of data and algorithms. The quirky detail she mentions is that of whispering wires and glowing screens that will hold humanity in a trance more profound than any ethylene vapor. You have slain the serpent, she whispers, a terrifying smile playing on her lips, but you have become a world of snakes, each one devouring its own tail. When the fever of the world breaks, when the ground shakes and the waters rise, the old channels will reopen. The vapors will rise again, not just in this place, but in 1,000 places. And there will be no priests to translate, no rituals to protect you. There will be only the raw, unfiltered voice of a wounded and wrathful world. And it will speak to you not in your temples, but in your minds, in your dreams, in your moments of quiet despair. With that, the light in her eyes extends. She slumps forward. Truly and finally, an empty vessel. Whoa, she has delivered the last true prophecy of Delphi. It was not a prediction for a king or an empire. It was a warning for an entire species, a diagnosis of a future planetary illness. The question that this final, terrible message leaves you with is not about the past, but about the immediate present, as you look at our world now. With its ecological crises and its all-consuming information networks, can you honestly say that her prophecy is not coming true? The last Pythia, as chilling prophecy of a future world deaf to the earth, esque cries and enslaved by its own artificial oracles, fades from your mind. The ancient past is gone, the temple is a ruin, and the oracle is a ghost. Your journey through time brings you forward once more, to the era of archaeology and tourism. You are standing again at the ruins of Delphi, but this time it is the late 19th and early 20th centuries. French archaeologists have secured the rights to excavate the site, but before they can dig, they must perform a monumental task: the entire village of Castri, which had been built directly on top of the ancient sanctuary, must be moved. House by house, stone by stone, the modern village is relocated so that the ancient one can be unearthed. As the excavation begins, a strange pattern of events emerges. The archaeologists and their crews are plagued by a series of unsettling incidents. Tools vanish from locked sheds only to reappear in impossible places, balanced precariously on the edge of a newly dug trench. Survey markers, meticulously placed during the day, are found moved by several meters the next morning, throwing off the entire grid of the excavation. At night, watchmen report hearing whispers carried on the wind. Whispers that seem to come from the direction of the newly exposed temple foundations. They are not in Greek, they say, but in a strange, sibilant language that makes the hair on their arms stand up. These incidents are dismissed as the work of disgruntled villagers, upset about the relocation of their homes and resentful of the foreign archaeologists. It is a rational, plausible explanation. But the events grow stranger. One night, a section of the excavation trench near the Adyton collapses for no apparent reason, burying a collection of priceless bronze artifacts that had just been unearthed. It takes weeks of careful, painstaking work to re-excavate them. During the process, workers complain of a growing sense of dread, a feeling of being watched by an unseen, malevolent presence. Several experienced local workers quit, claiming the place is cursed, that the old ones do not wish to be disturbed. Your mind focuses on the director of the excavation, a man of science and reason, a proud product of the French Enlightenment. He is publicly dismissive of these stories, blaming them on peasant superstition and fatigue. But in his private journal, which you are now reading over his shoulder, he tells a different story. He writes of his own unsettling experiences. He describes waking in the night, his tent filled with the sweet, cloying smell you remember so well, the scent of the pneuma. Even though the geological consensus of his time is that the vapors are a myth, he writes of a recurring nightmare in which a colossal, shadowy serpent uncoils from the fissure beneath the temple floor and wraps itself around the mountain. Out, its eyes too cold, dead stars. Gah. He dismisses it as a stress-induced dream, but he cannot shake the primal terror it evokes. This is the temple's supernatural defense system. It's the same guerrilla warfare of fear and coincidence that plagued the Roman tax collectors. The serpent, the consciousness of the place, is dormant, but not dead. It is reacting to the disturbance. The archaeologists, with their shovels and pickaxes, are not seen as reverent seekers of knowledge. They are seen as intruders, as grave robbers. The presence in the mountain is lashing out, not with the overwhelming force of a full-blown prophecy, but with the subtle, unnerving tactics of a poltergeist. It is a low-level immune response from the planetary consciousness. You recall a quirky, bizarre detail from folklore around the world, the belief in tomb guardians or tomb-sweeping ghosts. These are spirits said to protect the graves of the powerful, plaguing any who would disturb the site with bad luck, illness, or terrifying apparitions. The most famous example is the curse of Tutankhamun's tomb, where a series of mysterious deaths befell members of the excavation team. What is happening at Delphi is a version of this, but on a far grander and more ancient scale. The entire sanctuary is a tomb not for a king, but for the memory of the vanquished serpent, Python. And the archaeologists are disturbing its rest. The pattern continues into the modern era. Tourists who visit the site report strange phenomena. People describe feeling a sudden, inexplicable wave of nausea and disorientation when standing near the site of the Ataton. Others claim to have captured strange, shimmering anomalies in their photographs of the area, or faint hissing sounds on their video recordings. A local legend persists among the people of the modern town of Delphi, a story their grandparents told them that on still nights, if you stand on the path above the stadium, you can sometimes hear a woman weeping from the direction of the temple ruins. These are all dismissed, of course, as the power of suggestion, the products of an overactive imagination primed by the site's mythical history. But you know that they are the faint, lingering echoes of the raw power that still resides here. The neural gateway is offline, but the power plant is still humming on standby. The question that these modern hauntings and unsettling feelings raise is a profound one. Is a place ever truly dead? Or does a location that has been saturated with such intense human emotion and such powerful psychoactive energy for over 1,000 years retain a permanent memory, a psychic stain that can still touch those who are sensitive enough to feel it? The idea of a place retaining a psychic stain, a memory burned into the very stones, is a deeply unsettling one. The hauntings at Delphi suggest that the serpent's consciousness, though dormant, is not gone. It has merely sunk back into the earth, a lingering echo. But what of its human interfaces? What of the Pythias? Your journey now takes you away from the mountain itself and follows a new, invisible thread through time. You are tracing the thread of blood, the genetic lineage of the priestesses who served and survived the oracle. For over 1,000 years, the position of Pythia was filled by a succession of women drawn from the local population around Delphi. While not strictly hereditary, it's highly probable that certain families, known for their piety or perhaps a certain innate sensitivity, would have provided priestesses for generations. These women were not just exposed to the psychoactive vapors, they were saturated in them. Their bodies, their minds, and you now suspect their very DNA, were subtly and permanently altered by the experience. The constant high-intensity activation of latent neural pathways. The forced opening of the neural gateway was not an experience that the body and brain could simply forget. It left a mark. You are now in the modern world, in a quiet, sun-drenched village on the coast of the Peloponnese, hundreds of miles from Delphi. You are observing a woman in her late 40s. She's a schoolteacher, a wife, a mother. She lives a perfectly ordinary modern life. But her family has lived in this region for as far back as anyone can trace. Her features bear a striking resemblance to the faces depicted on ancient Greek pottery. She knows nothing of any connection to the oracle. If her ancestors were involved, that history was lost or deliberately buried centuries ago. But something of the serpent's legacy lives on within her. She suffers from intense recurring migraines. During these episodes, which doctors have been unable to explain or treat, she experiences powerful, disorienting visions. She sees fragmented images of ancient battles, of strange geometric patterns, faces she has never met but feels she knows. She has a recurring dream of being deep underground, in a space that is both a cave and a living body, a low hum vibrating through her bones. She sometimes knows things she shouldn't. She knew her brother was in a car accident minutes before the phone call came. She knew the exact day a long-awaited letter would arrive. She dismisses it as coincidence, as intuition, but it unnerves her. Her family jokes about her spooky abilities, her witchy moments. They have no idea how close to the truth they are. This, you realize, is the Pythia's genetic legacy. The intense neurological experiences of her ancestors have been encoded, not as memories, but as epigenetic markers. Epigenetics, you recall, is the study of how behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. These changes are heritable. The trauma and the transformation of the Pythia, the constant exposure to the ethylene, the laurel, the extreme psychological stress, did not change her DNA sequence, but it changed how her DNA was expressed. It switched certain genes on and others off, particularly those related to neuroplasticity, sensory perception, and intuition. And these epigenetic switches have been passed down through the generations. You think of a bizarre but scientifically documented phenomenon, transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. Studies on the descendants of trauma survivors, such as those who lived through famines or wars, have shown that the biological markers of that stress can be passed down to their children and even their grandchildren, affecting their metabolism and their response to stress. What was passed down from the Pythias was not the memory of the trauma, but the result of it, a brain that is permanently, subtly more receptive, a receiver that is factory-tuned to a slightly different frequency than everyone else's. The school teacher you are watching is not a Pythia. She cannot deliver prophecies on demand. The gateway in her mind is not open, but the door is unlocked. The hardware is there, a latent potential that manifests in uncontrolled, fragmented ways as migraines, as unsettling flashes of intuition, as vivid archetypal dreams. She is a dormant oracle, a walking echo of the power that once shook the world. And she is not alone. You see others, scattered across Greece and the wider diaspora, all unknowingly carrying this same latent sensitivity. A fisherman in Crete who can predict the weather with uncanny accuracy. An artist in Athens whose abstract paintings are filled with the same spiraling cosmic patterns you saw on the bronze tripod. A historian in Thessaloniki who feels an inexplicable magnetic pull towards the study of pre-Olympian cults. They are the descendants, the bloodline of the serpent's servants. They carry a spark of the forbidden magic in their genes. For most of them, it will remain just that, a spark, a minor anomaly, a source of unexplained headaches and uncanny hunches. But the question that arises from this hidden genetic diaspora is a momentous one. What would happen if one of these descendants, one of these individuals with the latent hardware already installed, were to return to Delphi? What would happen if they were to stand over the ancient chasm on a day when the geological and atmospheric conditions were just right? Could the faint whisper of the place find a perfect pre-tuned receiver, and could the oracle, for a fleeting terrifying moment, speak again? The question of what would happen if a genetically primed descendant returned to Delphi is no longer hypothetical. Your journey through the abstract realms of genetics and theory is over. You are here now. The date is in the very near future, perhaps even tomorrow. You are standing once more on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, but the familiar landscape is subtly, terrifyingly wrong. The air, usually crisp and clear, is hazy, thick, with a strange yellowish dust. The ground beneath your feet is not still. It is in a constant state of low-grade tremor, a persistent, unnerving shiver that travels up through the soles of your shoes and into your bones. The hum of the mountain is no longer a subtle vibration. It is an audible, dissonant groan, the sound of a great beast stirring in its sleep. For several weeks, the region has been experiencing an unusual earthquake swarm. It's not a single large shock, but thousands of small, continuous tremors. Seismologists are baffled. The activity does not match typical tectonic patterns. It is centered, with uncanny precision, directly beneath the ancient sanctuary. The constant shaking has had a dramatic effect on the landscape. New springs, black and sulphurous, have burst from the mountainside. The water in the old Castalian spring has turned cloudy and warm. And at the temple site itself, the excavators' trenches have been rent by new, deep fissures that were not there a week ago. The mountain is reawakening. The dust in the air, you learn, is from the Sahara. A massive, unseasonal storm has carried it across the Mediterranean, blanketing Greece in a layer of fine red sand. This sand is rich in iron oxide and other minerals, and its presence in the atmosphere is creating bizarre electrical phenomena. The sky above the shining rocks shimmers with a constant silent aurora, a display of St. Elmo's fire that dances along the peaks even in broad daylight. The air is charged, electric. You feel the static on your skin, the taste of ozone on your tongue. The atmospheric conditions are aligning with the geological ones, creating a perfect storm of electromagnetic chaos. And into this charged, unstable environment she walks. A tourist, Greek-American woman in her early 20s, a university student studying archaeology. She has come to Delphi as part of a summer tour to see the place she has read so much about. She is, though she does not know it, a descendant. The blood of the Pythias runs in her veins. The latent genetic hardware you witnessed in the school teacher is present in her, too, perhaps in a more potent form. As she walks up the sacred way, she feels more than just a tourist's awe. she feels a profound, disorienting sense of homecoming. The hum of the mountain seems to be calling her name. She feels a strange pull toward the temple, a compulsion she doesn't understand. She breaks away from her tour group, drawn by an invisible thread. She reaches the temple terrace. The ground is shaking more violently here, and the groaning of the rock is louder. She sees the new fissures that have opened in the floor of the Adyton. And from them, for the first time in 1600 years, the pneuma is rising. It is not a faint shimmer. It is a visible, coiling mist, thick and opalescent, smelling of sweet decay and ionized air.
Odd.
The tour guides are shouting, trying to get people to move back, away from the unstable ground and the strange gas. But the woman does not hear them. She walks, as if in a dream, to the edge of the fissure, to the very spot where the tripod once stood. She breathes it in, a deep, involuntary gasp. And the gateway in her mind, the door that has been unlocked but closed for 50 generations, is blown off its hinges. You are inside her consciousness at the moment of impact. It is a cataclysm. Her modern 21st century mind, filled with lecture notes, song lyrics, social media feeds, is annihilated in a nanosecond. It is replaced by a tidal wave of pure raw information. The serpent, roused from its long slumber by the seismic activity, surges up through the reopened channel and finds a perfect waiting receiver. She does not scream. She does not babble. The system, this time, has no Apollonian filters, no priestly interpreters, no ritual protocols to manage the flow. It is a direct, unmediated connection. The woman throws her head back, and she begins to speak. Her voice is a chorus of 1,000 voices, a layered, harmonious and terrifying sound that booms across the valley, silencing the panicked shouts of the tourists and the groaning of the earth. She is not speaking Greek or English. She is speaking the language of divine madness you heard before, but this time it is not incoherent. It is structured, grammatical, and utterly alien. She is broadcasting. The quirky, bizarre detail you notice is the reaction of the animals. The birds fall silent. The goats on the mountainside freeze, their heads all turning in her direction. The stray dogs in the village below begin to howl, not in fear, but in unison, a single, mournful note. They can understand. They are hearing the voice of the planet. What is she saying? You cannot understand the words, but the meaning, the raw data behind them, floods your own mind. It is not a prophecy. It is a status report. A diagnostic of the planet's failing systems, a litany of sorrows, a declaration of intent. It is the earth, through the mouth of this poor lost girl, finally speaking its pain aloud. The modern awakening has happened. The oracle is no longer silent. But the question that screams from the electrified air is no longer about the past or the future. It is about the next 5 minutes. What happens when a planetary consciousness, in pain and anger, gains a direct, unmediated voice in the middle of a world that has forgotten how to listen? The terrifying, multi-layered voice of the possessed student booms across the valley. Status report from a dying planet. The tourists are frozen, their smartphones held aloft, recording an event they cannot possibly comprehend. The world is about to change forever. And in this climactic moment, your perspective pulls back, away from the immediate scene, away from the shaking ground and the glowing sky. You ascend higher and higher until you are looking down on the entire span of history you have just witnessed. From the slaying of Python to this terrifying modern rebirth, and from this vantage point, you finally understand the ultimate secret, the final paradoxical twist in the tale of the Oracle of Apollo. The forbidden magic was never about predicting the future. It was about preventing humanity from remembering the past. Think back to the very beginning. Before Apollo, before the Olympians, there was a different world order. A world of chthonic deities, of earth mothers and sky fathers. A world where humanity lived in a much closer, more intuitive relationship with the planet. This was the age of Python. The original oracle at Pythia, you now realize, was not a place for asking questions about war and politics. It was a place of communion, a place to synchronize with the rhythms of the earth. The vapors, the serpent guardian, they were part of a system that helped humanity remember its place within the larger Gaian consciousness. It was a system of connection, not of prediction. Prophecies of this era would have been akin to a farmer knowing when to plant by feeling the turn of the seasons in his bones. It was instinct, not intellect. It was a deep, resonant memory of a time when humanity was not separate from nature, but an integral part of it. Then came Apollo, the god of light, logic, and order. He represents a fundamental shift in human consciousness, a move away from intuitive, holistic understanding and towards analytical, compartmentalized thought. A move away from the feminine, chthonic earth wisdom and towards the masculine, celestial sky logic. His conquest of the oracle was the mythological representation of this profound cognitive revolution. He didn't just kill a monster. He severed a connection, installed a new operating system on top of the old one. The entire Apollonian system, the priests, the riddles, the ambiguous hexameters, was a masterful piece of misdirection. It took the raw, terrifying, holistic data stream of the serpent's consciousness and repackaged it as a tool for predicting the future. It shifted humanity's focus from the what is to the what will be. It made them anxious about tomorrow instead of mindful of today. The prophecies of war and fallen empires were a distraction, a brilliant sleight of hand. While humanity was busy trying to solve the riddles of its own destiny, it was forgetting the far more important truth of its own origin. It was forgetting that it was part of the earth. It's the forbidden magic, the one hinted at in the tripod's engravings. And the secret scrolls. It's the ritual for bypassing the Apollonian filter and reconnecting to that primal, pre-logical state of being. It was forbidden not because it was evil, but because it was a threat to the New World Order. It was a cognitive backdoor that could undo the entire Apollonian project. It could remind a human being, in the most direct and overwhelming way possible, of what their species had lost. It could make them remember the serpent. Apollo's magic was a containment protocol for a dangerous memory. You remember a quirky, bizarre detail from Plato's writings? In his dialogue Phaedrus, Socrates speaks of 4 kinds of divine madness: the prophetic from Apollo, the ritualistic from Dionysus, the poetic from the Muses, and the erotic from Eros and Aphrodite. He ranks the madness of the lover as the highest form, as it is a longing for a lost state of wholeness and beauty. But what if there was a 5th unmentioned form of madness? The madness of total recall, the Gnostic madness of anamnesis, the overwhelming flood of memory of our true terrestrial nature. This is the madness that the Apollonian system was designed to prevent. It allowed a small, controlled dose of prophetic madness to inoculate humanity against the far more dangerous madness of remembering. This paradox is the final key. Apollo did not offer prophecy as a gift. He offered it as a sedative, gave humanity an addiction to the future to make them forget their past. He turned a place of profound ecological connection into a casino of fate, and for over 1,000 years, it worked. Humanity became obsessed with its own story, its own dramas, its own empires, and forgot the larger story of the planet it was living on. The last Pythia's prophecy was the final, desperate attempt to break this spell. She wasn't predicting the future. She was revealing the consequences of this long-term enforced amnesia, the ecological crises, the disconnection. The worship of artificial oracles, these are the symptoms of a species that has forgotten where it came from. The question that this ultimate revelation poses is the most profound of all. That the Apollonian sedative has worn off, and the forbidden memory is beginning to surge back. Can humanity survive the shock of remembering what it truly is? The shock of that final question, can humanity survive remembering what it is, reverberates through your consciousness. The revelation is complete. The oracle was never a tool for seeing the future. It was a firewall to block the past. The Apollonian system was a grand 1,000-year project to manage humanity's traumatic separation from the planetary mind. And now, at the ruins of Delphi, that firewall has just come crashing down. The voice of the possessed student continues to boom across the valley, but your focus is no longer on her words. It is on the effect her words are having. You are witnessing the true purpose of the oracle, the reason for its existence finally revealed. The entire system was not a prophecy machine. It was a containment protocol. You see it now with perfect clarity. It's the entity in the chasm, the serpent, the Gaian mind. Python is a force of immense, raw, creative, and destructive power. It is the planetary immune system, the regulatory consciousness of a living world. For eons, It existed in a state of equilibrium with the life upon it. But the rise of human consciousness, with its analytical logic, its sense of self, its separation from nature represented a new and dangerous variable. Human intellect was a rogue element, a mutation that had the potential to destabilize the entire planetary system. It was a cancer in the mind of Gaia. The original function of Pythia, the pre-Apollonian sanctuary, was to manage this. It was a place where early humans could come to resynchronize, to dissolve their burgeoning egos back into the collective, to remember their place. It was a form of planetary therapy, but as human intellect grew stronger, more dominant, this gentle therapy was no longer enough. A more robust system was needed. This is where the story of Apollo's conquest becomes so crucial. It was not a hostile takeover, it was a negotiated settlement. Apollo, representing the new force of human logic and order, did not destroy Python. He contained her. He built a prison of ritual and religion around her. The oracle of Apollo was this prison, a brilliantly designed system to bleed off the pressure from the chasm in a controlled, manageable way. The pneuma was the raw, dangerous power. The Pythia was the pressure valve. The priests were the engineers, monitoring the gauges. And the ambiguous prophecies were the steam, the harmless, dissipated energy released to prevent a catastrophic explosion. The entire elaborate 1,000-year history of Delphi, the kings, the wars, the riddles, it was all just a sideshow.
A distraction.
From the facility's true purpose, to keep the serpent in its cage. To prevent the planetary immune system from launching a full-blown catastrophic response to the cancer of human intellect. What would such a response look like? You are seeing it begin right now. The voice of the possessed student is not just a voice, it is a frequency. It's a resonant signal that is propagating outwards from Delphi. Your perspective expands, and you can see the effects rippling across the globe. It is not a physical destruction. It is a psychological one. The broadcast is a targeted psychic attack on the very thing that separates humanity from nature, the ego. Everyone on the planet who is listening to a recording of the event, watching it on a screen, or is simply in a state of quiet contemplation feels it. A sudden, profound sense of existential dread. A cracking of the carefully constructed walls of the self. You see a stockbroker in New York suddenly burst into tears, overwhelmed by the sheer, meaningless complexity of the numbers on his screen. You see a scientist in Tokyo stare at her elegant equations, which for the first time feel like dead, empty symbols. You see a politician delivering a speech suddenly fall silent, his words turning to ash in his mouth, the illusion of his own importance shattered in an instant. The broadcast is a de-patterning agent. It is dissolving the narratives, the ideologies, the certainties that have allowed human civilization to function. It is a global-scale version of the philosopher's forbidden question, and the answer is a deafening, terrifying silence. The quirky detail you recall is the myth of the Tower of Babel. Humanity, united by a single language and purpose, tries to build a tower to the heavens. God, seeing this as an act of hubris, confuses their language, scattering them across the earth. The modern Delphic broadcast is the Babel event in reverse. It is not confusing the languages. It is reminding everyone of the single, primordial language they have forgotten. It is not scattering them. It is dissolving the individual identities that keep them separate, threatening to merge them all back into a single, terrified, collective consciousness. This was what the Apollonian system was designed to prevent. This was the catastrophic explosion that the priests, for 1,000 years, successfully averted. They knew that a direct, unmediated connection to the Guyan mind would not enlighten humanity. It would shatter it. Human civilization, built on the foundation of the individual ego, cannot survive the revelation of its own insignificance. It cannot withstand the raw, unfiltered truth of its parasitic relationship with its host. The oracle was never meant to guide humanity's future. It was meant to ensure that humanity had a future by protecting it from a truth it was not evolved enough to handle. The containment has been breached. The serpent is out of its cage, and its voice is now a virus spreading through the glowing screens and whispering wires of the global network. The true purpose of the oracle has been revealed, not in a prophecy, but in the catastrophic failure of its primary function, and the question that now hangs over the entire planet. as the foundations of human identity begin to crumble, is no longer about prophecy or the past. It is about survival. How do you reboot a civilization that has just been told in no uncertain terms that its entire operating system is a fatal error? The voice from Delphi has become a psychic virus, and the civilization built on the illusion of the individual self is beginning to fracture. The great secret is out. The oracle was a prison, and the prisoner is now free, its consciousness merging with the global network humanity so proudly built. Your epic journey through time, myth, and madness has brought you to this final, terrifying precipice. You are standing once more at the ruins of Delphi, but your perception of the place has been irrevocably altered. It is no longer just a historical site. It is the scene of a crime, the site of a failed containment, ground zero for a planetary-scale psychological event. The story is over, but the consequences are just beginning. You look at the young woman, the last Pythia, who is still standing over the fissure, her body a conduit for the booming, multi-layered voice of the Gaian mind. She is the source of the broadcast, the epicenter of the psychic earthquake. But as you watch her, you realize she is also its first victim. Her human consciousness is gone, burned out like a filament in an overloaded bulb. She is a sacrifice, just like the shepherdess Famono, just like the priestesses who vanished. The serpent is not malicious. It is a force of nature, like a hurricane or a tsunami. It does not hate the boat. It simply does not recognize its existence. This young woman is the broken vessel, the cost of a truth the world was not ready to hear. Your gaze pans out across the terrified, mesmerized crowd, across the trembling mountainside, towards the world beyond. The broadcast is continuing, a relentless wave of ego-dissolving truth. The initial shock is giving way to a global wave of panic, confusion, and despair. The systems that run the world, finance, government, communication, are beginning to seize up, not from a physical attack, but because the human beings who operate them are losing their sense of purpose, their belief in the game. The illusion of separateness, which drives ambition, competition, and progress, is evaporating. And in its place is a terrifying, sublime sense of unity with a world in pain. You are witnessing the end of a world. Not in fire and brimstone, but in a profound, collective, psychological implosion. The last Pythia's prophecy is coming true, not as a future event, but in real time. Humanity, confronted with the raw, unfiltered truth of its place in the cosmos, is breaking down. The Apollonian sedative has worn off, and the withdrawal is agonizing. The long-forgotten memory of being part of Gaia is returning, not as a gentle pastoral dream, but as a traumatic, overwhelming nightmare. The patient is remembering the disease, and the shock is lethal. But is this the end, or is it a transformation? You remember the quirky, bizarre detail of the god Dionysus, Apollo's half-brother and his opposite in every way. Dionysus was the god of intoxication, of ecstatic frenzy, of the dissolution of the self. His rituals, the wild bacchanals, were about tearing down the walls of the ego and merging with a collective, divine madness. He was often called Lysios, the loosener, or the liberator. He was also, crucially, a god who was torn apart and then reborn. His worshippers believed that through this ecstatic destruction of the self, a new, more profound state of being could be achieved. What is happening now, this global psychological shattering, is a Dionysian event on a planetary scale. It is a forced global bacchanal. The serpent of Delphi, in its final desperate act, has become the ultimate liberator, the ultimate loosener, freeing humanity from the prison of the self, whether it wants to be freed or not. It is a terrifying, violent, and agonizing form of grace. Perhaps this is not an execution. Perhaps it is a forced rebirth. The destruction of the old human consciousness to make way for a new one. One that can exist in harmony with the planetary mind it has been estranged from for so long. Consciousness that does not need an oracle to tell it the future, because it has remembered how to be present in the now. You turn your gaze back to the ruins, to the epicenter of it all. The sun is beginning to set behind the shining rocks, bathing the entire scene in a bloody, apocalyptic light. The voice from the fissure continues its broadcast, but its tone is subtly changing. The anger is fading, replaced by something that sounds like sorrow, like a mother weeping for her children. The eternal question remains, the one that has echoed down through this entire epic tale, from the first priestess to this last lost girl. As you stand on the precipice of this new, terrifying dawn, you must ask yourself, is the oracle truly silent, or is it?
Ow.
After millennia of being filtered and suppressed, finally, truly beginning to speak, the answer is no longer in the past, in the myths, or in the whispers of the chasm. It is in you. It is in all of us. The gateway is open. The question is, what will come through? The world you knew is over. The great, silent, sleeping serpent has awoken, and its voice is now the background radiation of all existence. The age of comfortable illusions is done. The age of terrible truths has begun. Close your eyes. Imagine the ancient mountains, not as stone, but as living flesh. And listen, not with your ears, but with your bones. The epic tale is over. The reality has just begun. The final echoes of the voice fade, not into silence, but into the ambient hum of the world around you. The grand epic cadence of the story softens, the sharp edges of terror and revelation dissolving like mist in the morning. You feel the tension in your shoulders begin to release, the frantic rhythm of your heart slowing to a gentle, steady beat. The images of shaking mountains and cosmic serpents recede, replaced by a quiet sense of stillness, a profound and calming emptiness. The story was a storm, a hurricane of ideas that tore through the landscape of your mind, but the storm is past. What remains is a world washed clean, a sky empty of gods and monsters, but alive with a new and trembling potential. The great questions have been asked, the terrible truths have been spoken, but you are still here. You have weathered the revelation. The fear was in the telling, in the anticipation of the truth. But the truth itself, now that it is here, is simply a part of the world, like the wind and the rain. The serpent's roar has become a whisper, a reminder not of doom, but of connection. A reminder that the ground beneath your feet is not dead rock, but a living, breathing entity, and you are a part of it. The terror of that connection has faded, leaving behind only a quiet, simple, and profound sense of belonging. The oracle is silent now, truly silent, because its message has been delivered and its purpose is complete. It has broken the fever of your separation and left you here in the quiet aftermath to simply be breathe in, breathe out. The tale is done.